The night is heavy with mist, rolling across the broken ground of the Somme. Artillery flashes in the distance flicker like angry stars, while the rumble of guns becomes the heartbeat of a continent at war. In this world we know. The battle will drag on in mud and despair, lines unmoved, hopes crushed. But let us pause. Let us imagine, just for a moment, a turning of fate. What if that night ended differently? What if the Central Powers did not falter, but triumphed? What if everything went perfect? Welcome, dear listener, to World History Reversed. Wherever you are resting at night, or sitting in a quiet room, think of yourself as part of a vast memory connected across time and space by curiosity. Tonight we will drift together into a reimagined past, one that never was, but could have been. If this journey speaks to you, remember to press subscribe and join this circle of reflection where history and imagination meet. The Psalm 1916. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when men rose from their trenches, the ground beneath them trembling. The real war that history gave us turned this battle into a symbol of futility. Months of slaughter, hundreds of thousands lost, and yet no decisive gain. But let us take a different step. Imagine that in the summer of 1916, German command anticipated the Allied push with perfect clarity. Stormtrooper units trained in infiltration tactics were prepared months earlier, ready to thread through the fog of shell fire like shadows. The first shells fall, but in this altered vision, German artillery responds with precision rather than blind fury. Barrages are coordinated, communication lines intact, commanders free to adapt. In one sector, British infantry advance, expecting the wire to be cut, only to find it intact. Machine guns chatter, but here the counterattack is swifter than history recorded. Small German units pour into gaps, striking at command posts, scattering reserves before they can gather. The battlefield becomes not a stagnant field of death, but a chessboard overturned. One can picture the sound. Boots pounding over wooden duckboards, shouted orders in clipped German, the shrill notes of whistles cutting through smoke. Entire brigades collapse, not slowly, but all at once, like dominoes. Instead of attrition, breakthrough. The British front line bends, then buckles. French units, stretched already by Verdun, falter. By evening, German banners wave over ground they never dreamed of holding so quickly. The shock reverberates through every camp and cabinet. Now we open the doors of speculation. What follows such a blow? The Allies, stunned, might rally in desperation. Perhaps reinforcements pour in, shipping men across the Channel at even greater speed. Yet morale, the invisible glue of armies, is brittle. What if the French soldiers, already weary from Verdun's grind, see no point in holding? What if mutinies, which in our world came later, ignite sooner? We must also consider Germany's own fragility. Could victory at the Somme relieve the hunger gnawing at its cities, or only postpone it? Perhaps supplies seized from captured depots flow eastward, feeding a population that in reality suffered through the turnip winter. Imagine Berlin shopkeepers stocking real bread, children laughing at markets instead of queuing with ration cards. And what of politics? A swift victory on the Western Front strengthens the Kaiser's hand, silences critics in the Reichstag, and emboldens generals to dream larger. Could this alter the delicate balance within Germany itself, where conservatives clashed with socialists, where military ambition outpaced political caution? Would triumph heal these divisions, or merely bury them beneath celebration, waiting to rise again in peacetime? Picture Paris in this alternate summer. The boulevards, usually alive with chatter, fall eerily quiet. Newspapers, once proud with defiance, print in hushed tones of retreat. Imagine mothers clutching letters from sons gone missing in days rather than months. A defeated France is not only a military fact, but a psychological earthquake. Would the government sue for peace, or cling desperately to Britain, hoping across the Channel lies salvation? And Britain, how does she endure? London fog mingles with anxiety. Cabinet meetings stretch into the night, debating whether to double down or negotiate. The empire is vast, yet its core is vulnerable. What if the Somme breakthrough sparks whispers in India, in Ireland, in the colonies whispers that the empire is not invincible? This speculation need not run only toward collapse. Victory at the Somme could also inspire bold Allied resolve. History shows us that defeat can stiffen spines as much as victories can intoxicate. Perhaps Britain rallies her fleet, strikes harder with blockade, and digs deeper into her reserves. Perhaps the United States, witnessing the scales tip, finds reason sooner to involve herself, not later. Yet the timing is crucial. If Berlin controls swaths of France, if morale buckles in Paris, will any external aid arrive in time to reverse fortune? The imagery of that altered battlefield lingers. Muddy fields no longer soaked only with the blood of stalemate, but marked by swift conquest. The cries of soldiers blend with the distant peal of bells in Berlin, prematurely ringing as if to announce destiny. Yet destiny in history is never certain. Triumph on the Somme opens doors to possibilities, but none are guaranteed. As the day closes in our imagined world, the sun sets behind hastily dug new lines. Smoke rises in thin columns like exhausted sighs. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, carried by the wind over ruined villages. The sound is both victory's song and a question. If the Central Powers seize the moment here, what chain of events might it unleash across the world? The bell's echo fades, but it leads us eastward, toward another front, where another empire strains under the weight of war. In the east, Russia waits. The echo of that church bell drifts across ruined fields and shattered towns, carried further than any soldier's step. It lingers on the air until it reaches a different landscape, the endless plains of the east. Here the war is wide and fluid, stretching from the forests of Poland to the rivers that cut across Ukraine. In our true history, Russia endured staggering losses, yet remained in the fight until 1917, when revolution shattered the old empire from within. But if we imagine a Europe where the Somme became not a stalemate, but a decisive German triumph, then the ripple spreads eastward. The morale of the Tsar's armies, already fragile, begins to crack not in slow motion, but in sudden collapse. Picture the Russian soldier in this altered vision, poorly supplied, shivering in thin uniforms, rifle clutched with frostbitten hands. News drifts through the ranks, not of German exhaustion, but of German advance. Rumors of French defeat seep across the front lines like smoke, darkening hope. For men who have already endured Tannenberg, Gorlice, and the long retreat of 1915, the sense that their sacrifices lead nowhere becomes unbearable. In this version of events, desertion spreads like a fever, not in isolated pockets, but in waves. Entire battalions vanish into forests, melting back toward villages, toward homes, toward silence. What then of Nicholas II, the Tsar who bore both devotion to his dynasty and the weight of misfortune? In our timeline, his throne was already precarious, balancing between the loyalty of the army and the frustration of a people burdened by hunger and loss. If the Central Powers march triumphantly in the West, the Tsar faces a nightmare, fighting not only a stronger Germany, but also a growing doubt among his own generals. Perhaps some urge him toward negotiation, insisting that Russia cannot bleed indefinitely for allies who now seem broken. Others, bound by loyalty or pride, push for one more offensive, one more sacrifice. Which voice would he hear most clearly? Let us imagine two paths. In the first, Nicholas clings stubbornly to the war. His armies, driven by discipline rather than hope, launch another offensive. The shells roar, horses scream, the ground shakes. Yet this offensive, like those before it, collapses against German lines reinforced by victories in the West. Russian losses mount, and with them grows the bitterness that history eventually turned into revolution. Perhaps in this path, rebellion still comes, only faster, more violent, spreading through barracks and cities like wildfire. Petersburg, renamed Petrograd, becomes not only the seat of power, but the stage of its unraveling. In the second path, Nicholas bows to reality. He looks not to glory, but to survival. In this alternate vision, he seeks peace earlier, offering concessions to Berlin in exchange for stability. Imagine the conference halls where Russian envoys, weary and ashamed, hand over control of Poland, perhaps the Baltic provinces, maybe even influence over Ukraine. A humiliating peace, yes, but one that spares Russia the full collapse of revolution. Could such a peace preserve the Romanov dynasty a little longer, delaying the storm of Bolshevism? Or would the very act of concession invite unrest at home, convincing people that their rulers were weak, unworthy, and ripe for replacement? The human cost in this alternate East is staggering. Villages once occupied by weary Russian soldiers now echo with the tramp of German boots. Grain that once filled Russian wagons now feeds German cities. Perhaps Berlin does not starve through the bitter winter of 1916. Perhaps in Vienna, bakeries open their doors with flour supplied from conquered fields. Picture families in Germany gathering around tables heavy with bread and sausage, while across the front, Russian peasants face famine as requisitions strip their lands bare. Victory for one side often means hunger for the other, and yet, even in triumph, the Central Powers must tread carefully. To hold vast territories is not the same as to govern them. In this imagined scenario, German officers ride through Polish towns, greeted not with cheers, but with wary stares. Occupied peoples carry their silence like a hidden blade. What looks like conquest today may sow rebellion tomorrow. Could Germany manage such a vast empire of occupation, or would victory on paper become quicksand in practice? We must also look at the Austro Hungarian role. In reality, Vienna leaned heavily on German support to hold the Eastern Front. But with the Western breakthrough, German strength is magnified, and Austria Hungary finds itself basking in reflected glory. Imagine the Habsburg monarchy, long mocked as the sick man of Europe, suddenly appearing robust, its armies reclaiming Galicia with ease. Could this restore confidence among its diverse peoples, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Hungarians, or would triumph only deepen rivalries, each nationality demanding more from a monarchy that still struggled to define itself? Victory can mask fragility, but it does not erase it. The winds of speculation also drift toward revolution's shadows. If Germany triumphs in the East as in the West, perhaps Lenin, exiled and waiting, finds no opening. Without the crumbling of Russia, without the desperate gamble of 1917, the Bolsheviks may never seize their chance. Europe could emerge from the Great War without the red tide that reshaped so much of the 20th century, yet history rarely grants such simple erasures. If Bolshevism does not rise in Petrograd, perhaps a different form of upheaval brews anarchism, peasant rebellion, or military dictatorship. The pressure within Russia was too great to vanish entirely. Imagine, too, the whispers beyond Russia's borders. In the Balkans, in the Ottoman provinces, even in neutral lands, the sight of a Russian collapse alters the balance of courage and fear. Allies who once trusted in Russian manpower may reconsider. Neutrals who lean toward the Entente may hesitate. If Germany dictates terms in both West and East, what space remains for others to maneuver? The continent itself seems to tilt, its weight sliding toward Berlin and Vienna. And yet, in this imagined moment of triumph, there is still no certainty. History teaches us that victory often carries the seeds of its undoing. The Tsar may fall regardless, toppled not by battlefield defeat, but by discontent at home. The German army may spread itself too thin, its triumphs demanding more than its resources can sustain. The Austro Hungarian monarchy may bask in sunlight only briefly before its old fractures resurface. What looks perfect in the moment may prove fragile in the long run. The Eastern Front in this alternate history becomes a stage of collapse and possibility. Fields once soaked in Russian blood now host German parades. Villages once singing Orthodox hymns hear foreign boots and foreign commands. Yet beneath every victory lies the question of permanence. Will this new order endure, or will it crumble like ice beneath a spring thaw? As night falls on the endless plains, fires flicker in abandoned Russian camps, their glow lonely and cold. The silence is broken only by the distant cry of a wolf, carried across the steppe like a warning. The sound reminds us that even empires, no matter how triumphant, remain prey to forces larger than themselves. The howl lingers, and with it comes the image of Vienna, the empire that has long walked the line between strength and fragility, now given new life by this imagined course of events. The wolf's cry fades, replaced by the soft murmur of the Danube, carrying us westward toward the Habsburg capital. The Danube glimmers in the twilight, its waters carrying not only the reflection of fading sunlight, but also the weight of centuries. Along its banks rises Vienna, capital of an empire that many in our world dismissed as tired, fractured, and destined to fail. In reality, Austria Hungary staggered through the war, dependent upon German strength, weakened by internal divisions, and destined to collapse at its end. But in our imagined path, where the Central Powers have triumphed first on the Somme and then across the Eastern Front, Vienna stands differently. The Danube's murmur is no longer the song of decline, but of renewal. Picture the Ringstrasse, that broad boulevard lined with palaces and theaters. In our world, by 1918, it bore the quiet despair of an empire breaking apart, its people divided by language, faith, and loyalty. But in this vision, it glows with parades of victory. Flags of the Habsburg monarchy, double-headed eagles fluttering, ripple above cheering crowds. German officers march alongside Austro Hungarian soldiers, their uniforms brushed and gleaming, their boots striking rhythm on the cobblestones like a drumbeat of restored confidence. For a moment, the old empire seems young again. Victory on the battlefield can do strange things to politics. The monarchy, long besieged by the demands of its restless nationalities, now stands on firmer ground. Hungarians, Czechs, Croats, Slovaks, and others, all who once grumbled beneath the weight of German and Magyar dominance, are faced with a dilemma. Triumph offers prestige, resources, and protection. But it also sharpens their awareness of how much they contribute and how much they might claim in return. Would victory unify the patchwork peoples of the empire, or would it embolden them to demand even more? Imagine the salons of Vienna filled with debate. Aristocrats raise glasses of wine and speak of renewed glory, of an empire no longer the sick man but a central pillar of Europe. Yet across the city, in cafes thick with cigarette smoke, young intellectuals argue about federal reform. If the empire has been saved by victory, perhaps it can now afford to loosen its grip, to grant wider autonomy, to build a federation of equals rather than a pyramid of dominance. Some dream of a United States of Greater Austria, where nationalities coexist under a shared crown. Others scoff, believing victory grants the right to tighten control, not to compromise. In this imagined Vienna, the music of Strauss may still echo in grand halls, but beneath the waltz lies tension. Triumph provides breathing space, but not eternal harmony. Consider the Slavic peoples, Croats, Serbs within the empire, and others across its borders. Would they accept renewed Habsburg authority, softened perhaps by reforms? Or would they simmer quietly, dreaming of independence under the shadow of victory? For every parade, there may be a whisper in the countryside, a grumble in a tavern, a secret meeting in a student dormitory. Economically, the empire stands to gain from this alternate course. In our history, Austria Hungary emerged ruined, its industries starved, its railways broken, its agriculture shattered. But with the Central Powers victorious, Vienna gains access to conquered lands in the east, grain from Ukraine, oil from Galicia, resources flowing from the Balkans. All of these could feed and fuel the Habsburg state. Imagine trains rattling into Vienna's stations laden with goods, markets filling with bread, factories humming again. The empire might discover not decline, but prosperity. The cafes would buzz not with despair, but with cautious optimism. And yet, prosperity too brings challenges. Who reaps the benefits? Does Vienna hoard the spoils, or does it distribute them across its many peoples? Perhaps Hungarians demand a greater share, insisting that Budapest deserves equal weight with Vienna. Perhaps Czechs argue that their industry entitles them to political power. Perhaps South Slavs, promised much for their loyalty, find themselves disappointed, and resentment deepens under the velvet cloak of apparent success. Victory cannot erase the fact that Austria Hungary was never a single nation but a compromise stitched together by dynastic tradition. The question remains whether triumph strengthens the stitching or merely hides the tears for a little longer. We must also think of personalities. Emperor Franz Joseph, in reality, died in 1916, leaving the throne to his great-nephew Karl, a man of reformist instinct but limited power. In our alternate world, Franz Joseph still passes, but Karl inherits not a failing empire but a victorious one. This changes everything. A young emperor, still in his late 20s, sits upon a throne secured by battlefield triumph. His inclination toward reform might find fertile ground, offering federal compromises to satisfied peoples rather than desperate ones. Imagine Karl walking through the Hofburg Palace, corridors echoing with the footsteps of advisors, urging him to transform victory into permanence. Would he succeed, creating a more durable Habsburg federation, or would the inertia of empire, the conservatism of generals and aristocrats, stifle his vision? The cultural mood of Vienna would also shift. In our history, the twilight of the empire produced haunting art, Klimt, Schiele, Mahler, all tinged with the melancholy of decline. In this imagined Vienna, the same brilliance might take on a different hue, less of an elegy and more of a celebration. Paintings might depict triumphal arches, music might echo with pride rather than lament, yet art is never free of contradiction. Perhaps beneath the surface, the same anxieties would linger, unspoken but real, waiting for their moment. Diplomatically, Austria-Hungary's position in a victorious Central Europe is equally intriguing. Once dependent upon Germany, Vienna now finds itself stronger, with bargaining chips in hand. Would Karl attempt to balance Berlin's dominance by forging his own path, asserting independence within the alliance? Or would gratitude bind him more tightly, making Austria-Hungary not a partner, but a junior member of a German-led order? Imagine the councils of war transforming into councils of peace, where German generals demand annexations and Austrian diplomats argue for moderation, fearing unrest among Slavs. The very partnership that brought victory might strain in triumph. And what of the Balkans, that restless theater of conflict? With Serbia crushed and Bulgaria allied, Austria-Hungary could claim mastery over the region. Imagine garrisons stationed in Belgrade, new railways stretching through the mountains, Vienna declaring itself the guardian of stability in the south. But the Balkans have long memories and sharp tempers. Would Austrian rule be accepted quietly, or would it provoke endless uprisings, guerrilla warfare in mountain passes, conspiracies in hidden rooms? The shot that once killed Franz Ferdinand might echo again in different form, reminding the empire that victory abroad does not guarantee peace at home. In this alternate Vienna, the air is rich with contradictions. The scent of roses in palace gardens mingling with the smoke of industry, the strains of music clashing with the murmur of dissent. Triumph has given the empire a reprieve, perhaps even a chance for transformation. But whether that reprieve becomes renewal or merely postponement remains uncertain. As the night deepens over the city, lanterns glow along the Danube, their reflections trembling in the current. The river carries with it the weight of victory and the questions of tomorrow. Its waters flow south and east, toward the Ottoman lands, where another empire, older still, struggles to find its place in this imagined triumph. The flicker of Viennese lanterns dissolves into the shimmer of minarets beneath a crescent moon, and the murmur of the Danube becomes the call to prayer in Constantinople. The call to prayer rises through the twilight, drifting over the Bosphorus like a ribbon of sound, weaving through domes and minarets, echoing across the waters where Europe and Asia meet. Constantinople, ancient capital of empires, city of legends, breathes under its crescent moon. In our history, the Ottoman Empire, allied with the Central Powers, struggled under the weight of war. By 1918, it was exhausted, its provinces fractured, its heartlands starved. Yet if we step into this alternate path, where German banners wave victorious in the west, and the Tsar's armies crumble in the east, the Ottomans too find themselves lifted by tides of triumph. Imagine Gallipoli, that desperate campaign where Allied forces hurled themselves against cliffs and trenches. In reality, the Ottomans, led by Mustafa Kemal, held the ground with ferocious resolve, inflicting a bitter defeat on Britain and her dominions. In our alternate vision, the victory is even greater. Instead of merely holding, the Ottomans counterattack with precision, driving the Allies from the peninsula more swiftly, capturing not only equipment but also prestige. News spreads through the empire. The sick man of Europe has humbled one of the world's greatest powers. This prestige matters. For decades, European observers dismissed the Ottomans as doomed, a corpse waiting to be carved. But in this version of events, the empire breathes with unexpected vigor. Crowds in Constantinople gather along the Golden Horn to cheer their soldiers returning from Gallipoli, their uniforms tattered but their pride unshaken. The city's bazaars, usually filled with rumor and complaint, now hum with conversation about destiny and revival. The call to prayer blends with the clang of blacksmiths and the chatter of merchants, weaving a sense that perhaps the old empire might yet rise again. With Germany triumphant and Austria Hungary revitalized, the Ottoman alliance becomes more than desperation. Imagine German engineers, arriving in greater numbers, surveying the railways, extending the Berlin-Baghdad line deeper into Mesopotamia. Trains whistle through the desert, carrying not only soldiers but supplies, grain, and the tools of industry. Oil fields in Iraq, once peripheral, now gain immense strategic weight. Black gold flows toward Constantinople, and from there into the hungry markets of Central Europe. For the first time in generations, the empire discovers not only survival but prosperity. But prosperity is never simple. The Ottoman Empire was vast, stretched across Anatolia, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Arabia, and North Africa. Its people were diverse Turks, Arabs, Armenians, Kurds, Greeks, Jews, bound together by loyalty to the Sultanate Caliph, but divided by language, ambition, and faith. Victory on the battlefield might suppress unrest for a time, yet it also raises expectations. Arabs who fought under Ottoman banners, or who were prevented from rebelling by swifter victories, may demand recognition. Perhaps instead of revolt, they negotiate for autonomy within the empire, imagining a partnership rather than separation. Or perhaps their ambitions are merely postponed, their silence the kind that hides storm clouds. Consider, too, the fate of Armenia. In our world, tragedy unfolded there, one of the darkest chapters of the war. In an alternate path where the empire is victorious, the logic of suspicion may remain, or perhaps the urgency of repression diminishes. Would victory reduce the paranoia that fueled persecution, or would triumph embolden it further? History leaves us with questions that no speculation can answer with certainty, only with possibilities. Diplomatically, a triumphant Ottoman Empire shifts balances far beyond its borders. Britain, long the guardian of routes to India, now faces a nightmare. With the Ottomans secure, the Suez Canal lies threatened, Egypt less certain, and the Arab world no longer a field for easy promises. Imagine British officials in Cairo, staring grimly at maps, realizing that their empire's lifeline runs vulnerable under the shadow of revived Ottoman strength. Perhaps they redouble their hold, perhaps they retreat. Either path reshapes the destiny of the Middle East. And what of Russia's southern ambitions? In our world, the Tsar dreamed of Constantinople, of making the city a Russian port on the warm seas. In this alternate vision, with Russia broken and humiliated, that dream is crushed. Instead, the Ottomans look northward with confidence, their straits unchallenged, their sovereignty intact. The Black Sea becomes once more an Ottoman lake, its currents flowing freely into the Mediterranean under the crescent banner, yet triumph does not erase fragility. The empire's internal strains remain. In the villages of Anatolia, peasants still labor in poverty, their fields scarred by war requisitions. In the deserts of Arabia, tribes whisper of independence, embers that in our world ignited with Lawrence and revolt. Here, perhaps those embers smolder quietly, but smoldering does not mean extinguished. Victory buys time, not permanence. Still, let us imagine the cultural mood of this alternate Constantinople. Mosques illuminated at night, their domes glowing softly under lantern light. Poets reciting verses of revival, merchants hanging garlands across market stalls, young officers dreaming of reforms that will transform victory into renaissance. Perhaps even the Sultan himself, Mehmed V, feels a stir of hope in his twilight years, though he will soon pass and leave the throne to Mehmed VI. Would his successor find a stronger empire, or would he squander its renewed chance? History often turns on such questions of character. The alliance with Germany deepens. Berlin, triumphant in the West, no longer treats the Ottomans as a liability but as a partner. Joint ventures flourish. Military academies reorganized. Railways extended. Industries modernized. Imagine German and Turkish officers standing together on reviewing stands, speaking through interpreters, but bound by the common language of victory. The Ottoman army, once derided, becomes a respected force in this new order. And yet, within every victory lies a paradox. The stronger the Ottoman Empire grows, the more it may chafe under German dominance. Does Constantinople accept the role of junior partner, or does it quietly plan its own independent path? Perhaps the empire uses its position as bridge between Europe and Asia to carve out autonomy, playing Berlin and Vienna against each other, reminding them that no Central Europe can truly dominate without Ottoman cooperation. As with all things in this imagined history, certainty dissolves into possibility. The Ottoman resurgence could usher in stability, prosperity, and reform. Or it could mask old fractures, pushing rebellion and collapse further into the future, but not erasing them. The empire may glow brightly for a generation, only to face the same questions again. As dawn rises over the Bosphorus, seagulls cry above the waters, their wings catching the light. The sound mingles with the murmur of traders preparing their stalls, with the distant rumble of trains carrying goods eastward and westward. The city feels alive, not dying. Yet the horizon carries shadows too, for across the Adriatic, Italy watches nervously, caught between fear and ambition. The cry of the seagulls fades into the whisper of alpine winds, carrying us northward, into the mountains where Italy stands at a crossroads of destiny. The alpine winds whistle through narrow passes, carrying with them the scent of pine and snow, mingling with the iron tang of gunpowder. High upon the ridges, soldiers crouch in dugouts carved from rock, their breath steaming in the thin air. Below them stretch valleys where towns sleep uneasily, their church bells silenced by curfew. This is Italy's front, the long and punishing border where men cling to cliffs and glaciers, where avalanches kill as surely as artillery. In our true history, Italy entered the war in 1915 on the side of the Entente, lured by promises of territory, yet suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of Austria Hungary until the costly stand at the Piave and final victory in 1918. But in our imagined world, where the Central Powers triumph on the Somme, break Russia in the east, and renew the Ottoman alliance, Italy faces a very different choice. Picture Rome in this alternate moment. The marble columns of the Forum still stand as reminders of an older empire, but the city now wrestles with the burden of decisions. Prime Minister Antonio Salandra, along with his ministers, debates feverishly. In our history, the promise of South Tyrol, Istria, and Dalmatia drew Italy into war against her former allies in Vienna and Berlin. But if Austria Hungary, instead of tottering, now rises on the strength of victory, those promises appear like fragile glass. To attack a triumphant Central Europe would be folly. The ministers weigh their options, remain neutral, join the victors late to claim spoils, or double down on the Entente and risk ruin. Imagine the mood of the Italian people. In the piazzas of Florence and Naples, crowds gather around newspapers plastered with headlines of German victories. The cafes buzz with speculation. Have Italy's leaders chosen the wrong side? Mothers whisper their fears. Sons march reluctantly to the front. Priests preach patience but offer no certainty. The air is filled not only with smoke from chimneys but with doubt itself. In this altered timeline, doubt becomes a weapon sharper than any bayonet. The soldiers in the mountains feel it most keenly. Along the Isonzo, Italian divisions strain against entrenched Austro Hungarian defenses. In our world, 11 battles here achieved little but bloodshed, until Caporetto broke Italian lines in 1917. In this world, the news from the Somme and Galicia reaches them sooner, heavier. The knowledge that their allies falter, that the enemy grows stronger with each passing month, saps morale. Desertion, already a problem, may swell into waves. Picture soldiers slipping away at night, leaving rifles behind, trudging down into valleys toward home. A few shots fired in the dark, a few officers shouting threats, but discipline cannot bind men whose hearts no longer believe. What paths open for Italy in this alternate history? Let us imagine 3. In the first, Italy clings stubbornly to the Entente, ignoring reality, driven by pride and the dream of uniting all Italian lands under one flag. In this path, catastrophe looms. With Germany victorious and France and Austria secure in the east, Italy's offensives collapse faster than before. Caporetto becomes not a single disaster, but a series of crushing defeats, each pushing the Italian army further south. Imagine Austrian banners flying once more over Venetian fortresses, German troops marching across Lombardy. Rome trembles, and Italy sues for peace under humiliating terms. In the second path, Italy remains neutral after 1916, hesitating as the tide turns against the Entente. In this version, Salandra or his successors quietly withdraw Italian armies from major offensives, citing exhaustion. Italy becomes a spectator, waiting for the outcome of a war whose victor seems increasingly clear. When the Central Powers emerge triumphant, Italy bargains to retain its independence, perhaps offering token concessions or trade agreements in exchange for safety. The dream of expansion dies, but Italy survives intact, scarred yet whole. In the third path, more daring still, Italy flips sides altogether. Imagine backroom negotiations in Vienna, emissaries slipping through the Alps, documents drafted in secret chambers. Austria Hungary, eager to secure its southern flank, offers territory in exchange for Italian support. Perhaps South Tyrol and parts of Dalmatia are promised not as prizes for betrayal, but as rewards for loyalty. Rome, calculating that Germany's star rises ever higher, accepts. Italian divisions turn their guns not against Vienna, but against France, sealing the fate of the Entente. It is a vision both cynical and pragmatic, the kind of maneuver that reshapes alliances and redraws maps overnight. Whichever path is chosen, Italy's destiny in this imagined Europe shifts profoundly. A defeated Italy, broken by central triumph, may descend into political turmoil sooner than it did in our world, where fascism rose from post-war disillusionment. Neutrality might preserve stability, delaying upheaval but leaving ambition unfulfilled. An Italy aligned with the Central Powers could emerge as a minor victor, its pride intact, yet its future entangled with German hegemony. Each choice carries consequences not only for Italy, but for the balance of Europe. Culturally, too, the impact would be deep. In our history, the poetry of Ungaretti, the novels of Svevo, and the paintings of Boccioni reflected both the trauma and the dynamism of Italy's war experience. In this alternate path, the tone might differ. Instead of lament and loss, Italian art could veer toward irony, resignation, or even pride, depending on the outcome. Imagine futurist manifestos celebrating alliance with Germany or mourning the humiliation of defeat, their bold typography echoing either triumph or despair. Diplomatically, Italy's choice reverberates beyond its borders. France, seeing an ally hesitate or defect, sinks deeper into isolation. Britain, already straining to hold the seas and the Western Front, faces the nightmare of fighting without Southern support. The Mediterranean itself becomes contested waters, German and Austrian ships docking at Italian ports, the Royal Navy stretched thin. The ripple reaches as far as North Africa, where Italian colonies in Libya and Eritrea hang in the balance. Victory might strengthen Italy's imperial hand, or defeat might loosen it entirely. Let us not forget the ordinary Italian people in this imagined scenario. Farmers in Tuscany watching their sons conscripted, merchants in Milan balancing books amid uncertainty, fishermen in Sicily hearing distant rumors of German victories. For them, the grand strategies of ministers and generals translate into bread prices, missing loved ones, and shifting flags. History, whether real or imagined, is always felt most keenly in the quiet corners of daily life. As the Alpine winds whistle through the passes once more, they carry not answers but possibilities. Italy stands at its crossroads, every path marked by risk, every horizon uncertain. Will it cling to pride, retreat into caution, or gamble on betrayal? The winds swirl the question through mountain valleys, rustling prayer flags at shrines, echoing against cliffs that have witnessed centuries of war. And as the sound fades, the winds drift further westward, over the Alps, across the Channel, into the fog of London. There, another empire weighs its fate, wondering whether to fight alone or seek peace. The whisper of Alpine winds becomes the muffled toll of Big Ben through London's mist. Through the thick London fog, the toll of Big Ben resounds, slow and solemn, rolling across the Thames like the heartbeat of a weary empire. Street lamps glow faintly in the mist, their halos blurred, as if the city itself were uncertain of its future. Carriages clatter along cobblestones, and soldiers in khaki uniforms march through the haze, their boots echoing on damp pavements. This is Britain, in our imagined world, an island power, suddenly stripped of the confidence that once carried it into the Great War. With France shaken by defeat, with Russia crumbling in the east, and with Italy hesitating or even drifting away, Britain finds itself alone before the might of a triumphant Central Europe. Picture the war cabinet in Whitehall, gathered in a room thick with smoke. Ministers lean over maps, their faces etched with fatigue. Winston Churchill, his voice sharp and restless, urges defiance, while others mutter about the impossibility of carrying on alone. The Prime Minister, whether Asquith or Lloyd George, depending on the turn of politics, sits at the head, weighed down by the impossible choice. Should Britain continue the war, relying on her navy and empire, or should she seek peace with honor, cutting her losses before ruin arrives? The Royal Navy remains Britain's greatest weapon. In this alternate history, it still rules the seas, blockading German ports, patrolling the Atlantic, and guarding the Channel. But what does sea power mean when allies on land collapse? Imagine destroyers slicing through the waves, their searchlights probing the night, while merchant convoys struggle against U-boat attacks. The seas are alive with danger, but also with the promise of Britain's endurance. Could an island nation, starved of continental allies, still strangle Germany through blockade? Or would German victories on land render the blockade moot, providing Berlin with resources from conquered Russia and the Middle East? The British people, too, face uncertainty. In our history, they endured rationing and loss with remarkable resilience, buoyed by the belief that the Allies would prevail. In this alternate world, that belief flickers. Newspapers in London print grim reports. The fall of French cities, the collapse of Russian armies, the sudden strength of Austria and the Ottomans. Mothers in Manchester clutch telegrams with trembling hands. Children in Glasgow watch their fathers march off without the certainty of purpose. The war that once seemed winnable now feels like a long, dim corridor with no clear exit. And yet, Britain has endured such loneliness before. The memory of Napoleon lingers, when the island stood defiant while the continent lay under French control. Then, as now, the navy was Britain's shield, and perseverance its weapon. Perhaps, in this alternate moment, pride and memory combine to stiffen resolve. Londoners queue for bread but sing defiantly. Soldiers board ships for distant fronts, and the empire rallies to its core. India, Canada, Australia, South Africa. Would these dominions redouble their commitment? Or would the sight of Britain isolated weaken their loyalty? The empire's strength depends not only on force, but on faith. Imagine the colonies in this altered scenario. In Delhi, British officials peer anxiously at reports of unrest, wondering if news of Britain's solitude will spark rebellion. In Cairo, garrisons stand ready, fearing Ottoman resurgence across the Sinai. In South Africa, memories of Boer resistance stir uneasily. The empire was vast, but its seams were fragile. Without allies on the continent, every colony becomes both a resource and a burden, every rebellion a spark that could consume the whole. Politically, the pressure grows unbearable. The opposition in Parliament calls for negotiation, demanding that the government face reality. Peace talks are whispered in the corridors of neutral embassies, perhaps through Switzerland, perhaps through Sweden. Could Britain accept terms dictated from Berlin? What would they entail? The surrender of colonies? The recognition of German dominance in Europe? The thought chills ministers who still cling to pride. To sign such terms would mark the end of Britain's place as arbiter of the world, and yet to refuse may mean bankruptcy, hunger, and unrest. In this imagined London, the fog seems more than weather, it is a metaphor for the nation's condition. Shrouded in uncertainty, groping through dim light, unable to see clearly more than a few steps ahead. The chimes of Big Ben continue to mark the hours, but each hour feels heavier than the last. The military, too, debates its future. Generals argue that withdrawal from the continent may preserve the army for defense of the island. Others insist that to abandon France entirely would leave Britain vulnerable to invasion, whether real or imagined. The Channel, though narrow, becomes a vast psychological gulf. On one side, the victorious German army, on the other, an anxious Britain, fortified but isolated. And yet, even in this darkness, there is the possibility of light. History is never linear, and defeat does not always mean surrender. Perhaps Britain doubles down on her fleet, striking harder against German commerce, extending her blockade to starve even the resources won in Russia. Perhaps British scientists accelerate new weapons, tanks, aircraft, chemical innovations, seeking to tilt the balance again. The war could transform into a longer struggle, with Britain as the last island of resistance, her empire stretched but unbroken. The possibility of American intervention looms over every debate. In our history, the United States entered the war in 1917, tipping the balance. In this alternate world, would Washington still feel compelled to act? On one hand, German dominance might threaten American interests, pressing President Wilson to intervene sooner. On the other, if the Entente collapses, the cause may appear lost before America can mobilize. Britain may stand alone not only in Europe but in the world. Culturally, too, the mood shifts. Instead of the stoic optimism that marked wartime Britain, literature and art might sink into deeper melancholy. Imagine poems not of endurance, but of doubt, plays staged in London theaters not of heroism, but of quiet despair. Yet despair itself can forge resilience. A nation accustomed to isolation may embrace it once more, crafting an identity not of alliance, but of stubborn defiance. As the night deepens, the fog thickens along the Thames. Lamps burn dimly, their reflections trembling on the water. The great clock of Big Ben tolls again, its sound rolling over the river, mingling with the cries of gulls and the low horns of ships. Britain waits, uncertain, balancing between defiance and compromise, between pride and survival. The sound of the toll drifts westward across the ocean, carried by the waves. It becomes the hum of transatlantic steamers, their funnels billowing smoke as they cut through the dark Atlantic. On board, passengers speak in American accents, reading newspapers about Europe's collapse, debating whether their distant nation should intervene. The fog of London dissolves into the salt spray of the open sea, carrying us toward America's distant gaze. The hum of the transatlantic steamers cuts steadily through the night, their funnels trailing black smoke against the pale horizon. Waves slap against iron hulls, gulls circle overhead, and on the decks passengers lean against railings, staring westward toward the promise of land. Among them are businessmen, diplomats, and weary travelers carrying European newspapers filled with stories of collapse. France bent, Russia shattered, Britain alone. These ships are not only vessels of steel and steam, but carriers of information, delivering the tremors of a continent in upheaval to the shores of the United States. Imagine New York Harbor in this alternate moment. The Statue of Liberty rises, her torch catching the dawn, but the mood beneath her gaze is uncertain. Crowds gather on the piers, shouting greetings to arriving relatives, scanning the headlines of papers hawked by newsboys. Germany triumphant, the headlines declare. France retreats, Russia sues for peace, Britain stands alone. In coffeehouses and boardrooms alike, the question whispers, should America intervene, or should she remain distant from Europe's conflagration? President Woodrow Wilson sits in the White House, the weight of neutrality heavy on his shoulders. In our history, he tried to keep America out of the war, until unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmerman telegram forced his hand. But in this altered world, the landscape is changed. Germany is not desperate, not cornered, but victorious. Her armies march across France, her allies secure the Balkans and the Middle East, her influence stretches eastward into Russia. Wilson, gazing out at the White House lawns, faces not the choice of intervention to prevent collapse, but the dilemma of whether intervention is even possible. Picture the cabinet room in Washington, sunlight streaming through tall windows, maps of Europe spread across the table. Advisors debate furiously. Some argue that America must act, that a world dominated by Berlin will leave no space for American influence. They speak of ideals, of democracy threatened by monarchy triumphant. Others insist that intervention now would be folly. With the Entente crumbling, what army could America realistically send across the Atlantic in time? Neutrality, they argue, is not cowardice, but prudence. The American people themselves are divided. In the Midwest, German-American communities cheer discreetly for the Kaiser's victories, their loyalty torn between heritage and homeland. In cities like Boston and New York, where sympathy for Britain and France runs deeper, the mood is grim, tinged with resentment that allies have faltered. Across the South and West, many care little for Europe's quarrels, focusing instead on farms, railroads, and the pressing needs of their own land. In this imagined history, America gazes at Europe less as a rescuer and more as a wary spectator, unsure whether to step into a game already lost. Economics complicate the choice. In our world, American banks lent heavily to the Allies, making their success a matter of financial survival. But if France and Russia crumble early, if Britain falters, those loans may already be lost. Wall Street speculators study the figures anxiously, some fearing ruin, others seeing opportunity in a new order. Imagine German envoys, emboldened by victory, approaching American businessmen with offers of trade, investment, and markets. The allure of profit may soften hostility, even as newspapers decry German dominance. Wilson's rhetoric of moral purpose, his vision of America as a beacon of democracy, would find itself tested here. If he calls for intervention, can he rally Congress? Can he convince farmers in Iowa and miners in Pennsylvania that their sons should die to reverse what already seems irreversible? Or would his 14 points in this alternate world never be written at all, their words lost to a silence imposed by caution? Without Wilson's intervention, the very concept of a League of Nations may vanish, leaving the 20th century to unfold under different banners. Culturally, the uncertainty seeps into daily life. Imagine American newspapers filled with editorials debating not how to win but whether to care. Poets write verses of isolation, novelists describe a world where Europe consumes itself while America remains untouched. In music halls, comedians joke about French surrender or British fog, their laughter masking unease. Even in universities, professors lecture about the dangers of entangling alliances, echoing Washington's old advice with renewed relevance. And yet, America is never entirely detached. On the docks of New York, ships continue to unload goods, some bound for Britain, others seized by German raiders. American sailors face danger on the seas, and each incident stirs outrage. If a German submarine sinks a ship with American passengers, would neutrality survive? Or would the cry of vengeance force Wilson's hand, even if the Entente seemed doomed? History offers no easy answer. Let us consider two paths. In the first, America stays out, its leaders declaring that the old world must settle its own quarrels. Germany consolidates its dominance, and America grows in strength behind its ocean walls. The 20th century becomes not a story of American intervention, but of American detachment, a nation rising economically yet hesitant to commit militarily. Perhaps by mid-century, America faces a Europe united under German hegemony, forced to bargain rather than dictate. In the second path, America intervenes despite the odds, sending troops across the Atlantic into a theater already dominated by Central Power victories. The result may be tragic American boys landing on French shores only to be overwhelmed, their sacrifice remembered as noble but futile. Or perhaps their presence stiffens British resolve, prolonging the war into a grinding struggle of blockade and resistance, even against overwhelming odds. Victory might still be possible, but at a cost far greater than history demanded. Every possibility carries with it ripples. If America remains distant, the world loses the moral language that Wilson gave it, the dream of a new order built on principles rather than conquest. If America intervenes and fails, the nation may retreat inward, scarred by defeat, unwilling to venture abroad for decades. Only in the shadows does a third possibility whisper that America, patient and pragmatic, waits not to save the Entente, but to negotiate with the victors, shaping peace through commerce rather than cannon. As the transatlantic steamers press onward, their funnels belching smoke into the vast sky, the horizon brightens with morning light. The ocean stretches calm, but beneath its surface lurk the silent hunters of the U-boat fleet, reminders that neutrality itself is fragile. On deck, passengers shield their eyes against the sun, gazing toward a land that seems at once distant from Europe's war and yet inescapably tied to it. The hum of the ship's engines becomes a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat carrying us back eastward across the ocean. The sound blends into the muffled noise of Parisian streets, where carts rattle on cobblestones and voices murmur with both pride and despair. The focus shifts now to France, its soul battered but not yet extinguished, facing choices as profound as those in London and Washington. The sound of carts rattling over cobblestones echoes through the boulevards of Paris, mingling with the murmur of weary voices. Newspapers flap in the morning breeze, pinned against kiosks by wooden sticks, their headlines painted in bold letters. Reverses at the front, Allies retreat, Germany advances. Paris, the beating heart of France, stirs uneasily under a sky dimmed by both smoke and doubt. In our real history, France endured the agony of Verdun and the mutinies of 1917, yet held on until victory arrived in 1918. But in this imagined world, where the Somme has ended in disaster, Russia has collapsed, and Britain stands uncertain, France faces a dilemma more severe than any it has ever known. Picture the French Chamber of Deputies, its benches filled with men whose faces are drawn with fatigue. Some demand resistance at all costs, invoking the spirit of 1792, when citizens rose to defend the Republic from invading monarchies. Others argue for negotiation, their voices hushed but urgent, fearing that continued resistance will only bring destruction to the nation. The Premier, Whoever fate places in that chair, perhaps Aristide Briand, perhaps Georges Clemenceau, must weigh not only the fate of an army, but of an entire civilization. Does France fight on, bleeding herself white, or does she bend before the storm in hopes of survival? The army itself is stretched thin. Along the front, French soldiers huddle in trenches, carved deep into chalk and mud. Their uniforms are torn, their boots caked with filth, their spirits worn. They have endured Verdun, where shells turned earth into hell, and the Somme, where men fell by the thousands for yards of ground. Now they hear rumors of German victories elsewhere, of allies faltering, of Paris itself perhaps standing vulnerable. Some soldiers still clutch to pride, whispering that France cannot fall, that the Marseillaise still carries strength. Others mutter darker thoughts, their eyes hollow, their minds turning toward mutiny. In our world, the mutinies of 1917 were contained, suppressed, but not forgotten. In this alternate timeline, they may come sooner, fiercer, fueled not only by exhaustion, but by the knowledge that allies are gone. Imagine regiments refusing to leave trenches, soldiers singing revolutionary songs, red flags appearing in camps. Officers attempt discipline, but how does one command men who no longer believe? The line between army and revolution blurs, the specter of 1871's commune rising from memory like a ghost. And yet, France is not only exhaustion, it is also defiance, pride, and the memory of centuries. Picture Paris at night, gas lamps flickering along the Seine, cafes filled with citizens debating in hushed but determined tones. Painters, writers, and students gather, their arguments heated. Some call for peace, some for resistance, others for a new revolution that will sweep away both war and monarchy alike, not only in Germany but everywhere. France has always been a furnace where ideas blaze. Even in defeat, that furnace may ignite. If France chooses to negotiate, what might the terms be? Berlin, emboldened by victory, might demand Alsace-Lorraine beyond dispute, perhaps additional territories in the north, perhaps economic concessions binding France into Germany's orbit. Paris may be forced to accept humiliations that echo those of 1871, when Prussian troops marched through its streets. Would such a peace preserve France as a nation, or hollow it into a shadow, resentful and waiting for revenge? History suggests that humiliation rarely breeds harmony, rather it breeds the hunger for reversal. If France chooses to resist, how long could she endure? Perhaps the army retreats behind the Loire, fighting a defensive war across the countryside. Perhaps Paris becomes a fortress, its boulevards transformed into barricades, as in revolutions past. The Eiffel Tower, once a symbol of modern pride, looms over a city braced for siege. Yet resistance without allies may be nothing more than martyrdom. Could the French nation survive such sacrifice, or would it collapse under the strain? Consider also the colonies. In North Africa, soldiers from Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia have already fought and bled for France. Would they remain loyal if the motherland falters, or would they see weakness as an opening for independence? In Indochina, in West Africa, in the Caribbean, the French flag still flies, but its meaning depends on the strength of the center. A weakened France may lose more than territory in Europe. It may lose its global empire. Culturally, the French dilemma echoes in art and literature. Imagine poets writing of despair in cramped Parisian apartments, their verses filled with questions of honor and futility. Painters turn their canvases dark, depicting ruins rather than hope. Yet even in darkness, French creativity burns fiercely. Perhaps this alternate defeat produces not silence but new voices, calling for a world remade. Would the avant-garde turn more radical, rejecting not only tradition, but the very structures of power that led to war? We must also reflect on individuals. Picture Clemenceau, the tiger, his eyes flashing as he declares that France must fight to the end, even if it costs everything. Picture Briand, softer in tone, arguing that peace now may save lives later. Picture Pétain, the soldier's general, weighing whether his men can endure another offensive. Each man faces choices that could alter the destiny of the nation. In this alternate world, their decisions carry even heavier weight, for the margin between survival and ruin is razor thin. And then there is the question of the French people themselves. In the countryside, peasants labor in fields scarred by war, hearing distant thunder of artillery but determined to bring in harvests. In the cities, workers strike for better wages, their protests mingling with demands for peace. Families gather around radios listening to speeches that promise salvation yet deliver uncertainty. France is not a monolith. It is a chorus of voices, many discordant, all yearning for clarity in a time of fog. As the dilemma deepens, Paris itself becomes a symbol. Its wide boulevards, once built by housemen for grandeur, now echo with uncertainty. Soldiers march, but their steps lack conviction. The bells of Notre Dame toll, their sound heavy with both pride and sorrow. Along the Seine, reflections shimmer on dark waters, broken by ripples that seem to whisper, resist, surrender, or revolt. The night grows quiet, the city settling into uneasy slumber. The lamps dim, the voices fade, and only the river flows steadily beneath its bridges, indifferent to human turmoil. Yet even in sleep, the dilemma remains unresolved. France stands at the edge of history, unsure whether to leap, retreat, or endure. The river's steady murmur carries us eastward, away from Paris to Berlin, where victory is not a question but a celebration. The quiet waters of the Seine merge with the triumphant strains of brass bands, their notes ringing through wide avenues as Berlin prepares to celebrate its triumph. The gentle murmur of the Seine gives way to the blare of brass bands, their triumphant notes ringing through broad avenues lined with flags. Berlin, the capital of the German Empire, surges with energy. Crowds pack Unter den Linden, waving banners of black, white, and red. Soldiers march in perfect columns, boots striking cobblestones with the rhythm of victory. Children hoist paper flags, women toss flowers from balconies, and the air hums with the roar of voices chanting the Kaiser's name. This is not the weary Berlin of 1918 as we know it, stricken by hunger and doubt, but a Berlin basking in triumph, victorious beyond imagination. Picture the Kaiser himself, Wilhelm II, riding in an open carriage, his spiked helmet glinting in the sunday. His mustache bristles with pride, his hand raised in salute as he receives the adoration of his people. In our true history, Wilhelm would flee into exile, a symbol of failure. But here, he embodies glory, the emperor of a nation that has humbled France, broken Russia, isolated Britain, and revived Austria and the Ottomans. Around him ride generals in gleaming uniforms, Hindenburg, Ludendorff, perhaps even younger commanders whose names would otherwise have been lost to obscurity. Their reputations are no longer tarnished by stalemate but immortalized by victory. Yet beneath the pomp lies complexity. What does victory mean for Germany? For the common Berliners lining the streets, it means bread in the shops again, laughter in beer halls, confidence that the sacrifices of their sons were not in vain. Imagine families gathered around tables, heavy with food imported from conquered territories, grain from Ukraine, cattle from Poland, perhaps even oil from Ottoman fields. The bitter turnip winter never arrives. Instead, Germany enjoys the bounty of triumph, and ordinary citizens revel in relief. For the elites, victory offers opportunity but also danger. Industrialists envision a German-led economic order, with markets across Europe and beyond. Politicians debate how to transform battlefield gains into lasting dominance. Some call for annexations, eager to expand Germany's borders permanently. Others argue for economic hegemony rather than territorial conquest, fearing that too much expansion will provoke endless rebellion. Berlin's parliament buzzes with these debates, the Reichstag at once empowered and overshadowed by the military's prestige. And what of Wilhelm himself? In victory, he may feel vindicated, convinced that his vision of Weltpolitik, the global policy of empire and power was correct all along. He may strut with arrogance, dismissing dissent, tightening his grip on government. Yet triumph can also tempt moderation. With Europe at his feet, perhaps Wilhelm imagines himself as a magnanimous ruler, offering peace terms that leave vanquished nations humbled but not destroyed. Which path he chooses, arrogance or moderation, will shape not only Germany's future, but the fate of the world. The mood of Berlin is heady, but it carries undertones of tension. Victories abroad do not erase divisions at home. Social Democrats, long the voice of labor, watch uneasily as militarism dominates. Workers cheer parades, but still demand rights. Conservatives bask in triumph, but worry about change. The chasm between the army and civilian government, so wide in our world, remains here as well, masked by the glitter of celebration, but not erased. Culturally, too, victory reshapes the city. Imagine theaters staging patriotic plays, operas swelling with martial themes, painters capturing not despair but grandeur. The avant-garde, once shadowed by war's futility, now finds itself in a strange position. Do artists celebrate triumph, or do they whisper doubts about its cost? Berlin may shine with banners, but within its cafes, beneath the smoke of cigars, intellectuals argue whether Germany has gained security or merely postponed future dangers. Diplomatically, Berlin becomes the new heart of Europe. Ambassadors from neutral nations line up at the Wilhelmstrasse, eager to curry favor with the victor. In our history, Versailles humiliated Germany. In this alternate world, Berlin may dictate peace in a hall of mirrors reversed, where French or British delegates bow their heads. Imagine negotiations where German officials, pens poised over maps, redraw borders to their liking. Belgium becomes a dependency, Poland a protectorate, Ukraine a satellite. Central Europe is woven into a web of treaties and agreements, binding it to Berlin. The parade outside masks the unease of those beyond Germany's borders. To the east, conquered peoples grumble in silence. To the west, Britain seethes in isolation. To the south, Italy hesitates, calculating whether to cling to neutrality or align with the victors. And across the ocean, America watches warily, uncertain whether this triumph means stability or domination. For all its glory, Berlin's victory casts long shadows. Let us imagine the ordinary Berliner on this day of celebration. A factory worker in wedding, released from long hours, marches with his family to see the parade. His daughter waves a paper flag. His wife buys pastries with ration coupons that suddenly stretch further. He feels pride, relief, and gratitude, but also a nagging thought. What now? Will life return to normal, or will new sacrifices be demanded to hold these vast conquests? Victory parades have a strange rhythm. They begin with euphoria, the air alive with music and cheer, but as the last soldier passes, as the banners are folded, as the crowds disperse, the silence afterward is heavy. What follows celebration is not always clarity but questions. How to govern, how to rule, how to prevent victory from becoming a burden. Berlin, at the height of its triumph, faces this paradox. The brass bands play into the evening, their notes echoing down broad avenues lit by lanterns. Fireworks burst above the city, their sparks falling like stars over the Reichstag dome. Children gasp in wonder, lovers embrace, veterans salute. The city glows with pride. Yet somewhere in a quieter district, an old man sits by a window, listening to the music fade, and wonders whether this triumph will endure or crumble as others have before. As night settles, the cheers quiet, and the city exhales. The sound of fireworks fades into the scratch of pens upon parchment, for the next chapter of this imagined history is not parades, but peace treaties. The thunder of cannons and the roar of crowds now give way to the soft rasp of ink as Berlin begins to shape a new order on paper. The fireworks above Berlin fade, and in their place comes a quieter but no less momentous sound, the scratch of pens moving steadily across parchment. The drums of war have silenced for now, replaced by the murmurs of diplomats in echoing halls, the shuffle of papers, the creak of chairs as men lean forward to study maps. In this imagined history, Germany, no longer the humbled supplicant of Versailles, but the triumphant architect of victory, dictates the shape of peace. The air is heavy with ink and ambition. Picture the conference chamber in Berlin, its tall windows draped with banners of black, white, and red. At the center stands a vast table strewn with maps of Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. German generals, their uniforms immaculate, confer with diplomats, their fingers tracing lines across borders. The mood is not defensive but assertive, the victors determining what form the continent shall now take. Delegates from Austria Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria sit nearby, their voices welcomed but clearly secondary to those of Berlin. Representatives from defeated France and Russia, their faces pale and stern, wait for terms they can neither shape nor avoid. What might such a German peace look like? The first and most obvious prize is the return of Alsace-Lorraine, secure in German hands without dispute, but victory encourages ambition. Northern France, rich in coal and industry, may be placed under German occupation or economic control. Belgium, invaded in 1914, could become a vassal state, its ports serving as outposts for the German navy. Luxembourg, perhaps, would be annexed outright. Each decision reshapes the map not merely for a generation, but potentially for centuries. To the east, the collapse of Russia opens vast possibilities. Ukraine, with its endless grain fields, may be declared independent, but under German protection. Poland could be reconstituted not as a sovereign state but as a buffer, its rulers chosen with Berlin's approval. The Baltic lands, from Riga to Tallinn, might be absorbed into a German sphere, governed by loyal administrators or even by German nobles transplanted eastward. Imagine trains carrying settlers from Saxony or Prussia into these new frontiers, their farms spreading across lands once ruled by the Tsar. Germany would not only win a war, but build a Mitteleuropa, a Central Europe dominated by its economy and culture. The Ottomans, too, would claim their share. In this alternate peace, they retain not only their empire but expand it, securing the Arabian provinces that in our world slipped away. With German support, Ottoman sovereignty over Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Syria becomes unquestioned. Oil, the resource of the new century, flows through Ottoman hands into German markets. The Suez Canal, threatened rather than secured, forces Britain into perpetual anxiety. Constantinople, once dismissed as dying, becomes the jewel of a revitalized alliance, its power sustained by German railroads and arms. Austria Hungary, renewed by victory, seeks rewards in the Balkans. Serbia, once the spark of war, is broken and divided. Perhaps its lands are partitioned between Austria and Bulgaria, or perhaps a puppet kingdom is installed, its crown beholden to Vienna. Romania, if it dared to join the Entente, finds itself punished, its provinces redistributed. The empire of the Habsburgs, once derided as fragile, stands suddenly as a victor, though still a fragile one beneath the gloss of triumph. But peace is not only about borders, it is about economics, trade routes, and influence. Imagine a German-led customs union stretching across Central and Eastern Europe, binding economies to Berlin's factories and banks. Tariffs favor German goods, raw materials flow toward German industry, and markets open under German supervision. This Mitteleuropa becomes not just a political order, but an economic empire, one less visible than annexations, but far more enduring. Railroads tie together Berlin, Vienna, Constantinople, and beyond, steel arteries pumping life into a new continental order. For the defeated, the terms sting deeply. France, humiliated once more, faces the prospect of occupation or tribute. Its pride, already scarred by 1871, bleeds again. Will French politicians accept such terms, or will they sow the seeds of vengeance for future generations? Russia, too, humiliated by the loss of Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltics, faces its own reckoning. The Tsar may cling to his throne for a while longer, but his prestige shatters. Revolution, though delayed, may still come, fueled not by war's exhaustion, but by the shame of peace imposed by foreigners. And Britain, though not seated at Berlin's table, feels the weight of every signature. The Channel remains a barrier. The Royal Navy still commands the seas, but Britain faces a Europe it cannot penetrate. A German-dominated continent threatens its empire indirectly, through trade, through influence, through the slow squeeze of irrelevance. Britain must decide whether to accept this new order or resist it, but resistance alone may not suffice against a system built not only on armies but on treaties and tariffs. The mood in Berlin as these treaties are signed is jubilant. Crowds gather outside the conference halls, cheering as announcements are read aloud. Newspapers declare the dawn of a new age, their ink smelling of triumph. Children memorize the new maps in schoolrooms, their fingers tracing borders drawn by victory. Yet within the halls, even as pens move across paper, some voices whisper caution. Hindenburg and Ludendorff may dream of permanent dominance, but diplomats warn of resentment, of conquered peoples biding their time, of allies who may not remain content forever. Peace written in ink can be undone in blood. Let us imagine the ordinary clerk tasked with copying these treaties by hand. He sits at a wooden desk, the lamplight flickering on parchment, his pen scratching slowly across the page. He writes of borders, of concessions, of reparations, his script neat and precise, yet as he copies the words, he wonders what they mean beyond paper. Will the lines drawn tonight hold? Will the ink dry into permanence? Or will it dissolve in the storms of tomorrow? His doubts, though unspoken, echo the uncertainties that haunt every peace built on triumph. The treaties are signed, the maps redrawn, the victors satisfied for now. But as the diplomats disperse, as the generals return to their barracks, as the crowds cheer, a quieter question remains. How long can this order endure? History suggests that every dominance breeds resistance, every imposed peace carries within it the seed of its undoing. The German peace may look perfect, but perfection in history is always temporary. As the ink dries on the parchment, the hall grows quiet. The rustle of papers fades into silence, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock. The sound of the clock's pendulum swings like a metronome, marking not only time, but uncertainty. That steady ticking carries us southward, into the Balkans, where the smallest nations feel the heaviest weight of the new order. The pendulum swings, its tick steady and relentless, echoing like a heartbeat through silent chambers. As it swings, its sound stretches outward, carried over rivers and mountains, until it reaches the hills and valleys of the Balkans. Here, time itself has always seemed fragile, measured not only by clocks but by the rhythms of rebellion and reprisal. In our history, the Balkans were the tinderbox that ignited the Great War. In this alternate one, they are reshaped by its outcome, bent beneath the weight of a German peace and an Austro Hungarian triumph. Picture Belgrade, once proud capital of Serbia, now subdued. Its streets, where men once marched defiantly to resist Austria's demands, are patrolled by foreign soldiers. The Serbian flag, symbol of national pride, is lowered, replaced by banners of the victors. Cafes that once buzzed with talk of independence are hushed, their windows shuttered, their patrons whispering cautiously. Serbia, which in reality endured devastation but emerged as a symbol of defiance, is in this world broken, partitioned, perhaps divided between Austria and Bulgaria. The nation that once dreamed of uniting the South Slavs now finds itself the prize of others. But repression is never the whole story. In the mountains of Bosnia and Montenegro, shadows move through forests. Small bands of men gather, their rifles old, but their determination fierce. Around campfires they whisper of revenge, of waiting for the moment when the empires grow tired, when rebellion can flare again. The Balkans have always carried long memories. Even under foreign banners, the dream of freedom smolders. Austria Hungary, emboldened by victory, claims its reward. Vienna insists that Serbian defiance must be punished, that the southern frontier must be secured once and for all. Railroads push into the Balkans, iron veins binding new provinces to the empire's heart. Officials arrive in towns to reorganize schools, courts, and administrations. German is taught alongside Magyar, the empire's bureaucracy extending its reach. Yet beneath these official acts, resentment coils. Will victory transform the Balkans into obedient provinces, or will it create a restless frontier that drains the empire's strength? Bulgaria, too, finds itself emboldened. In our world, it joined the Central Powers with hopes of territorial gain, and in this alternate peace, it claims them more fully. Macedonia, Thrace, perhaps even parts of Serbia, lands it long coveted, are now draped in its colors. Sofia celebrates, its people cheering parades, its leaders boasting that the dream of Greater Bulgaria is fulfilled. But dreams fulfilled often create new ones. Having tasted expansion, will Bulgaria be content, or will it seek more, pressing further into the Balkans and clashing with allies it once followed? Greece watches warily. In our history, it hesitated, torn between neutrality, alliance, and internal division. In this world, with Germany triumphant and the Balkans redrawn, Greece becomes a cautious spectator. King Constantine, married to the Kaiser's sister, may lean toward accommodation, ensuring Greek sovereignty by quiet diplomacy. Yet Venizelos and others, who in reality sought alliance with the Entente, must swallow defeat. Greece, once poised to play a decisive role, now steps back, waiting, calculating, watching the continent shift around it. The Balkans, under German peace, are a mosaic of imposed order. Borders are redrawn not by the will of peoples, but by the pen strokes of victors. Some villages find themselves under Austrian officials, others under Bulgarian garrisons, others under Ottoman watch. Families divided by these new lines stare across rivers and valleys, wondering which banner will hang tomorrow. The land itself seems restless, the soil carrying memories of battles fought, graves unmarked, promises broken. Culturally, the impact is profound. Serbian poets, once voices of defiance, now write in coded verse, their words cloaked in allegory to evade censors. Bulgarian schools teach children that the nation has finally risen, filling classrooms with pride. In Vienna, newspapers trumpet the success of the empire's civilizing mission in the south. Yet, in secret, pamphlets circulate, smuggled across mountains, carrying the old call: unity, independence, resistance. The Balkans reimagining is not only about politics and culture, it is also about strategy. For Germany, controlling the Balkans means access to routes southward, toward the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Railroads stretch from Berlin through Vienna to Constantinople, carrying troops and trade. The Balkans become both corridor and fortress, binding Central Europe to the Ottoman world. But corridors are vulnerable. Every tunnel through a mountain, every bridge across a gorge, becomes a target for rebels. The same geography that once ignited war now threatens to undermine peace. Let us imagine three possible futures. In the first, the Balkans remain subdued, their peoples too exhausted to rise, their energies channeled into survival. The imposed order holds for decades, allowing Austria Hungary and Germany to reap stability from lands once chaotic. In the second, rebellion simmers, rising every few years in new forms. Guerrilla bands, student uprisings, assassinations of officials. The Balkans remain a bleeding wound, draining the resources of victors who thought themselves secure. In the third, the dream of a South Slav federation is reborn in exile, nurtured abroad until one day it erupts again, shaking the imposed order to its roots. Ordinary life in this alternate Balkans reflects these contradictions. Farmers in Croatian fields sow grain under new flags but whisper old songs as they work. Merchants in Sofia count coins with pride, seeing prosperity rise from new borders. Children in Belgrade recite lessons written by Austrian officials. their young voices carrying words that do not reflect the stories told at their family tables. History in the Balkans is always double-layered, the surface imposed, the depths enduring. As night falls, the pendulum's ticking seems to grow louder, echoing through valleys where shepherds guide their flocks, through cities where lamplight glows faintly on cobblestones. The sound is steady, but in the Balkans it feels fragile, as if time itself hesitates, uncertain whether this imposed order will endure or shatter. The pendulum swings on, its rhythm carrying us eastward once more, beyond the mountains and rivers, into the deserts and caravan routes of the Middle East. There, under the crescent moon and the endless stars, the Ottoman Empire stands, transformed by triumph, reshaping not only its own lands but the destiny of the entire region. Beneath the crescent moon, caravans move slowly across the desert, their silhouettes outlined by starlight, camels swaying gently as they tread upon sand that glitters faintly under the night sky. The air is cool, the silence broken only by the bells tied to saddles and the murmured chants of drivers guiding their beasts. This is the Middle East in our imagined history, a land where the Ottoman Empire has not collapsed but risen anew, fortified by the triumph of the Central Powers. In our reality, the Arab Revolt shattered Ottoman rule. British armies seized Jerusalem and Baghdad, and the empire's lands were partitioned into mandates. But in this alternate world, the desert winds carry a different story. Picture Damascus. Not under the banners of Sharif Hussein's revolt, but still draped in Ottoman colors. Its markets bustle with trade, German advisors strolling alongside Turkish officials, engineers drawing up plans for new railroads to connect the city to Baghdad and beyond. The Hejaz Railway, in our world attacked and sabotaged by rebels, here runs uninterrupted, its tracks gleaming under the sun as locomotives carry pilgrims and soldiers alike. The dream of linking Constantinople to Mecca by steel and steam, once fragile, becomes reality under victory's protection. In Mesopotamia, oil wells glisten in lamplight, their derricks rising like skeletons against the horizon. German companies, backed by Ottoman allies, secure contracts to develop these fields, ensuring that the lifeblood of the modern age flows into central power hands. Baghdad, instead of falling to British forces, becomes a hub of Ottoman-German collaboration. Imagine trains arriving with machinery, rivers carrying barges of supplies, workshops buzzing with activity. Where once war brought devastation, in this vision industry plants its roots. Jerusalem, too, remains Ottoman, its holy sites guarded by soldiers loyal to the Sultanate Caliph. In our world, British soldiers under General Allenby entered the city humbly on foot, declaring liberation. In this alternate path, the Ottomans hold it firmly, perhaps even investing in its renewal as a symbol of unity. Pilgrims arrive from across the empire, their devotion reinforcing the Sultan's claim as guardian of Islam's sacred places. The call to prayer rings across the hills, not as an echo of decline, but as a proclamation of restored authority. But triumph does not erase tension. The Arabs, who in our history rose in revolt with British encouragement, may in this version hesitate. Perhaps Sharif Hussein of Mecca, seeing German and Ottoman power secure, chooses loyalty over rebellion. Perhaps he has promised greater autonomy within the empire, his sons given princely titles, their banners displayed beside those of the Sultan. Yet beneath this accommodation smolders the same yearning for independence. Victory delays rebellion, but does not erase the dream of Arab sovereignty. One can imagine coffeehouses in Damascus and Cairo buzzing with whispers, students in Beirut writing pamphlets, tribal leaders in the desert weighing loyalty against ambition. The British, meanwhile, face their own nightmare. In Egypt, the Suez Canal remains under threat, its waters patrolled by warships, its banks fortified in haste. In India, the call of the Caliph resonates, stirring unease among Muslims who look to Constantinople with reverence. London, already isolated in Europe, now confronts the possibility of losing its dominance in the Middle East, the very artery of its empire. In this alternate world, British generals in Cairo and Delhi draft frantic reports, warning that Ottoman revival may spark unrest across the empire. The Ottomans themselves face choices as complex as their victories. Do they tighten their grip, ruling conquered provinces with firm authority, or do they grant autonomy, weaving Arabs, Kurds, and others into a broader imperial fabric? Victory provides strength, but also the temptation of arrogance. A magnanimous empire might endure. A repressive one may only store up rebellion for the future. Which path would Constantinople choose? History gives us hints, but no certainties. Economically, the transformation is profound. With German capital and Ottoman resources intertwined, the Middle East becomes a corridor of trade and industry. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway, completed without sabotage, channels goods from Europe to the Gulf. Ports in Basra and Alexandretta bustle with ships, their holds heavy with grain, textiles, oil, and pilgrims. Caravans that once crept slowly through deserts now share space with railroads, the rhythm of camel bells mingling with the whistle of steam engines. The ancient and the modern coexist, reshaping daily life in ways once unimaginable. Culturally, too, a renaissance might stir. Ottoman victory restores confidence to a civilization long humiliated by decline. Poets in Istanbul and Cairo write verses not of sorrow but of pride. Scholars in Damascus and Baghdad publish works that blend tradition with modernity. Mosques and universities expand, funded by spoils of war and German investment. Imagine a Middle Eastern Renaissance unfolding not under foreign mandates, but under Ottoman patronage, its tone shaped by triumph rather than survival. Yet contradictions remain. The Armenians, whose suffering marked the war, may still face repression under an emboldened Ottoman state. Kurdish tribes may find their aspirations ignored, their lands caught between empire and alliance. Christians in Syria and Lebanon, once courted by foreign powers, may feel abandoned, their hopes for protection dashed. Victory changes the context, but not the complexity of empire. Let us imagine three possible futures of this transformed Middle East. In the first, the Ottomans consolidate their gains, reforming their institutions, balancing diversity with central authority. The empire survives into the 20th century as a modernized state, allied with Germany, rivaling Britain and France in global influence. In the second, triumph breeds overreach. The Ottomans, intoxicated by success, suppress dissent harshly, sparking new revolts that tear at their seams. In the third, the Middle East becomes a theater of balance, with Germany and the Ottomans holding sway but facing constant intrigue from Britain, and perhaps even America, eager to secure their own foothold in the age of oil. For the ordinary people of the region, these changes alter the rhythms of life. Farmers in Palestine harvest olives under Ottoman banners, but sell them now in markets linked to German trade. Merchants in Baghdad count profits from oil, their wealth mingling with foreign engineers who fill the city's hotels. Pilgrims in Mecca ride trains rather than camels, their journeys shortened but their devotion unchanged. History is always felt in the smallest gestures, a loaf of bread more abundant, a prayer whispered under a flag, a rumor carried across a marketplace. As dawn breaks over the desert, the caravans continue their march, their bells chime softly, blending with the hiss of distant locomotives. The desert seems timeless, yet even here history shifts. The empire that once seemed destined for collapse now strides into a future bright, with possibility but shadowed by risk. The sound of camel bells fades, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against riverbanks, as the Danube carries us back toward Vienna, where the question of empire and identity remains unresolved. The Danube laps softly against its banks, its waters carrying whispers of triumph from east to west. The river glides past villages and vineyards, before winding once more through Vienna, the city of music, empire, and contradiction. Lanterns gleam along the quays, their reflections trembling on the current, as if even the river itself is uncertain of the empire's fate. In our alternate history, Austria Hungary has survived not as a crumbling relic, but as a victorious power. Yet victory, though it strengthens the monarchy, does not dissolve the fractures that lie beneath its surface. Instead, it casts them in sharper relief, forcing the empire to confront questions long postponed. Picture the Hofburg Palace, its grand halls echoing with footsteps of courtiers and ministers. Emperor Karl, young and earnest, walks through corridors lined with portraits of ancestors. He has inherited not decline but triumph, and with it the burden of shaping harmony from discord. His advisors urge him in different directions. Some demand tighter control, insisting that victory grants the right to enforce authority. Others whisper of reform, arguing that triumph gives the empire breathing space to attempt federal solutions, to turn fragile loyalty into something more enduring. In the cafes of Vienna, smoke curls upward as intellectuals debate. The newspapers trumpet victory, but writers, poets, and students press for more. Czechs dream of cultural autonomy, Hungarians demand parity, Croats and Slovenes speak of representation. Some imagine a federation, a United States of Greater Austria, where each nationality shares power. Others see only continued dominance by Germans and Magyars, dressed in new words but unchanged in substance. The cafe tables fill with arguments, each conversation accompanied by clinking glasses and the soft rustle of papers. Vienna glitters, but its harmony is delicate. Travel further into the empire, and the cracks become clearer. In Prague, Czech voices grow louder, demanding schools, offices, and courts in their own language. In Budapest, Hungarian politicians insist on their prerogatives, wary of sharing too much power with Slavs or Germans. In Zagreb and Sarajevo, South Slavs whisper that the dream of independence has not died, only shifted into dormancy. Victory has strengthened the empire's borders, but within them the struggle of identities persists. Economically, triumph brings new opportunities. Grain from Ukraine, oil from Galicia, livestock from the Balkans, these flow into the empire's markets, feeding industries that once starved. Trains rattle into Vienna's stations laden with goods, factories hum with renewed vigor, and shop windows sparkle with abundance not seen in years. For ordinary people, life improves. Bread returns to tables, wages rise, and the scars of war seem for a time to heal. Yet prosperity does not touch all equally. In villages of the Carpathians, peasants still labor in poverty. In Dalmatian ports, sailors watch as foreign officers command. Inequality remains, and with it the seeds of discontent. Culturally, Vienna blossoms. The city that produced Klimt, Mahler, and Freud now revels in its status as both conqueror and capital of a diverse empire. Operas premiere with fanfare, concert halls thunder with applause, and cafes brim with artists, painting not only decay but triumph. Yet even art reflects unease. Some works celebrate the empire's renewal, gilding it with grandeur. Others hint at fragility, using irony and abstraction to suggest that beneath the surface, harmony lies discord waiting to break through. Let us imagine three futures for this fragile harmony. In the first, Emperor Karl embraces reform. He establishes a federation, granting autonomy to Czechs, Croats, and others, weaving them into a new imperial fabric. The empire survives not merely as a monarchy, but as a union, its diversity turned into strength. In the second, Karl fails to act decisively, hemmed in by conservative forces. Victory breeds complacency, reforms stall, and old resentments resurface. The empire survives for now, but its foundation weakens, storing instability for the decades ahead. In the third, triumph intoxicates Vienna. Leaders mistake victory for permanence, ignoring calls for reform, suppressing dissent with arrogance. In this path, the empire collapses not from defeat, but from its own blindness, undone by the very diversity it could not reconcile. Ordinary life reflects these possibilities. In a Prague classroom, children recite lessons in Czech, their teachers emboldened by small reforms, their parents hopeful for more. In Budapest, markets overflow with produce from new lands, but politicians grumble that Germans grow too powerful. In Sarajevo, a tavern fills with quiet songs of resistance, lyrics disguised as folk ballads but carrying the promise that freedom waits. Harmony exists, but is fragile, dependent on choices yet to be made. Diplomatically, Austria-Hungary finds itself in a peculiar position. It is a victor, yet overshadowed by its German ally. Berlin dictates the grand strategy, the outlines of peace, the economic order. Vienna gains spoils but risks becoming dependent. Will the Habsburg monarchy assert independence, shaping its own path, or will it sink deeper into Germany's shadow? The answer depends not only on politics but on willpower, on whether Karl can balance gratitude with ambition. The Danube itself becomes a symbol of this uncertainty. Flowing from the Black Forest through Vienna to the Black Sea, it connects Germans, Hungarians, Slavs, and Turks. Its waters carry goods and stories, triumphs and resentments. Each bend reflects a different face of the empire: prosperity in Vienna, tension in Budapest, silence in the Balkans. To float along its current is to hear both harmony and discord, a symphony not yet resolved. As night deepens over Vienna, the city glows with lanterns and music. Couples stroll along the Ringstrasse, carriages roll past theaters, cafes hum with conversation. From a distance, harmony seems secure, a city at peace after victory. Yet if one listens closely, beneath the laughter and music, there is another sound, the faint murmur of demands unmet, of questions unanswered. Victory has given the empire another chance, but harmony remains as fragile as glass, beautiful yet easily shattered. The murmur fades into the sound of machinery, of wheels clanking and pistons hissing. From Vienna's factories and train stations, industry awakens, its smoke curling into the night sky. The empire's survival now turns not only on politics, but on economics, on whether prosperity can stabilize what victory alone cannot secure. The hiss of pistons echoes through vast train sheds, steam curling upward in thick white plumes. Smoke rises from factory chimneys, blending with the night sky until it blurs into a gray veil above the city. The steady clank of machines, the thrum of looms, the whir of gears, these sounds become the heartbeat of an empire that has survived the war not by collapse, as in our world, but by triumph. Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottomans, joined by allies and bound by railroads, now face the question of what to do with their victory. For it is one thing to win battles, another to build an order sustained by prosperity. Imagine Berlin's industrial districts alive with renewed vigor. In our reality, hunger and shortages plagued German cities. Children grew thin on turnips and ersatz bread. But in this alternate world, the flow of resources from conquered lands transforms deprivation into abundance. Trains rattle into stations carrying grain from Ukraine, coal from the Donbass, timber from Poland. Ships unload oil from Mesopotamia, metals from the Balkans. Factories that once shut down for lack of fuel roar back to life, their furnaces glowing, their workers proud. Wages rise, bread is plentiful, and the specter of hunger retreats. Vienna too hums with activity. Once an empire on the brink of economic collapse, Austria-Hungary now enjoys the fruits of conquest. Galician oil fields pump steadily, Balkan livestock fills markets, and Czech industry, once starved of materials, finds itself supplied again. Budapest's rail yards bustle with commerce, linking east and west. Ordinary people see change in small but vital ways. Shoes available in shops, butter on tables, newspapers filled not with complaints about shortages, but with advertisements for new products. The empire's survival becomes tangible, not in parades, but in bread loaves and coin purses. The Ottomans benefit as well. With German engineers aiding them, they tap the riches of their land grain, cotton, oil. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway becomes not just a military line, but a commercial artery. Goods flow from Anatolia and Mesopotamia toward European markets, while manufactured products make the return journey. The bazaars of Constantinople glow with fabrics, spices, and tools, their stalls filled with goods that might have been scarce had the empire collapsed. But prosperity is uneven, and unevenness creates tension. German industry thrives at the center of this new system, dominating markets and dictating terms. Smaller partners Austria Hungary, the Ottomans, even Bulgaria benefit, but often as suppliers rather than equals. Raw materials flow outward, finished products flow inward, weaving an economic web that binds them tightly to Berlin. Is this true partnership or quiet domination dressed in the language of alliance? For ordinary workers, prosperity brings relief, but also new struggles. In Berlin, wages rise, but so do expectations. Workers demand shorter hours, safer factories, political recognition. Social democrats, long the voice of labor, press for reform, their arguments harder to silence in a time of abundance. In Vienna, factory owners profit handsomely, but peasant laborers in Galicia or the Balkans see little change, their toil enriching cities far away. The same trains that deliver prosperity to the capitals carry resentment from the peripheries. Culturally, the economic revival reshapes daily life. Newspapers brim with advertisements for new consumer goods, bicycles, sewing machines, phonographs. Cafes buzz with chatter about rising markets, investment opportunities, and the promise of modern comforts. Music halls celebrate the optimism of the age, their songs light and hopeful, contrasting sharply with the elegiac tones that marked our real history. Yet beneath the optimism lurks a subtle anxiety. Is this prosperity sustainable or merely borrowed from the spoils of war? Let us imagine three paths. In the first, the Central Powers craft a balanced system. They use their dominance not merely to extract, but to integrate, investing in infrastructure across their territories, raising standards of living broadly. This Mitteleuropa becomes a genuine commonwealth, with prosperity breeding loyalty, at least for a time. In the second, economic exploitation dominates. Berlin takes, and others give. The peripheries grow resentful, nationalism festers, and what looks like harmony becomes a brittle arrangement, waiting for crisis to shatter it. In the third, abundance intoxicates the victors. Leaders mistake temporary plenty for permanent stability, ignoring the possibility that global markets, technological change, or colonial competition may one day undermine their empire of prosperity. Global implications are equally profound. Britain, weakened on the continent, still controls the seas, but its commercial dominance faces challenge. German goods flow into markets once dominated by British textiles or French wines. In Africa, in South America, in Asia, merchants begin to see German traders not as occasional competitors, but as leaders of a new economic order. America, watching across the Atlantic, must decide whether to engage with this system, negotiate with it, or resist it. The 20th century, instead of being defined by Anglo-American financial power, may unfold under German economic hegemony. Consider the everyday lives of people across this system. In a Bavarian village, children enjoy chocolate again, once scarce but now plentiful. In a Galician oil town, workers labor harder than ever, their wages barely improved, but their sense of importance heightened by the empire's reliance on their wells. In a Turkish port, sailors watch German cargo ships arrive, bringing manufactured goods, while their own vessels carry cotton and grain outward. The rhythm of life shifts subtly, but profoundly, as prosperity flows in channels dug by victory. And yet, prosperity itself can be fragile. A poor harvest in Ukraine, a strike in German coal mines, unrest in the Balkans, any of these could send ripples through the system. Victory creates abundance, but it also creates dependence. The larger the web, the more vulnerable it becomes to a single broken thread. History suggests that economic empires are as precarious as military ones, their strength measured not only by wealth, but by resilience in crisis. As twilight falls, factories continue to glow, their furnaces painting the night sky with orange light. Trains rumble into darkness, their whistles echoing across valleys. In Vienna, workers stream from factories, their laughter mixing with fatigue. In Berlin, cafes stay open late, filled with businessmen and students debating the future. In Constantinople, markets closed their stalls, the smell of spices lingering in the evening air. Everywhere prosperity hums, but always with the question, for how long? The hiss of pistons quiets, the smoke drifts upward, dissolving into the night sky. The hum of industry gives way to the creak of ships at dock, their ropes straining, their decks loaded with cargo. From Hamburg to London, from Alexandria to Calcutta, the sea lanes carry goods, but also tension. For across the water, Britain watches, her empire vast yet shaken, her pride intact but tested. The glow of continental factories fades into the mist over the Thames, where Britain confronts her imperial reckoning. The creak of ships drifts across the Thames, mingling with the slow swirl of fog that cloaks London's docks. Cranes stand tall like skeletal guardians, their cables groaning as crates are lifted from holds heavy with goods. The smell of tar, coal, and salt lingers in the damp air, while sailors in oilskins tramp across gangplanks with weary steps. In this imagined world, Britain has not collapsed, but she has lost her balance. The Central Powers dominate the continent, their factories hum with stolen abundance, their railways bind together a new economic order. Britain, once the unrivaled mistress of global trade, now stares across the water at a Europe where German banners fly. The island endures, but its empire trembles with uncertainty. Picture the British cabinet meeting in Downing Street. The walls are lined with maps, red pins marking colonies and sea routes. Ministers lean forward, their voices hushed and tense. Some argue that Britain must hold its empire more tightly than ever, doubling down on India, Egypt, and Africa to offset the loss of continental influence. Others whisper of retrenchment, warning that overextension will breed rebellion. The Prime Minister listens, his face pale in the lamplight, caught between pride and pragmatism. How does an empire reconcile the weight of victory's absence with the demands of global rule? In India, the reckoning is felt keenly. The Viceroy in Delhi reads reports of unrest, his pen trembling slightly as he writes to London. Indian soldiers have fought bravely under British command, but news of Central Power victories spreads through bazaars and temples. Whispers rise. If Britain is weakened, perhaps the Raj is not invincible. Nationalist leaders, in our world already stirring, find their cause emboldened. Gandhi speaks not only of reform, but of liberation. His words carried further by the sense that the empire's foundations are less secure than they once appeared. In Egypt, the Suez Canal glitters beneath the sun, lifeline of the empire, yet its waters feel vulnerable. Ottoman triumph to the east has changed the balance. The Sultanate Caliph, still enthroned in Constantinople, commands reverence among many Muslims. The call of the caliphate reverberates across Cairo and the Nile Valley, stirring both devotion and defiance. British garrisons stand alert, rifles gleaming in the desert heat, but anxiety thickens the air. If the Ottomans backed by German arms choose to press westward, can Britain truly hold the canal? Further south, in Africa, the reckoning takes other forms. Colonies long considered secure now question their future. In South Africa, Afrikaner resentment smolders. Some whisper that German triumph in Europe proves Britain's weakness. In West Africa, chiefs and merchants weigh loyalties, calculating whether Britain's trade or Germany's growing influence offers the better future. The empire is vast, but vastness is not the same as stability. Even the dominions feel the tremor. In Canada, newspapers debate whether sending men across the ocean has been worth the sacrifice. In Australia and New Zealand, where Gallipoli in our history was remembered with pride, the story now feels different. An Ottoman victory at the Dardanelles makes the losses sharper, the grief heavier, the meaning uncertain. Loyalty remains, but questions multiply. If Britain is no longer the world's foremost power, what does loyalty mean? Economically, Britain's reckoning is severe. Once the workshop of the world, it now finds markets contested by German goods flowing from Mitteleuropa. German railroads link Berlin to Baghdad, while British merchants find themselves undercut in the Mediterranean and the Near East. The pound sterling, once unrivaled, now competes uneasily with the mark. London's financial houses still glitter, but behind their stone facades, bankers worry. They know that power follows credit, and credit follows confidence. If Britain cannot project strength, can it still hold the loyalty of investors across the world? Culturally, the reckoning seeps into daily life. In London's theaters, plays once written in the spirit of victory now lean toward melancholy, their characters questioning sacrifice. Poets write verses filled with fog and fatigue, metaphors for an empire whose vision is clouded. Painters capture the docks, the cranes, the ships, but their canvases are tinged with gray, as if to say that Britain's empire is no longer a sunrise but a twilight. And yet, Britain is not without resilience. The Royal Navy still rules the seas, its dreadnoughts patrolling from Gibraltar to Singapore. The empire still commands millions of subjects, immense resources, and vast territories. Pride and habit run deep. Perhaps Britain will recover, consolidating its empire more tightly, finding new ways to balance against a dominant Europe. Or perhaps the reckoning will prove too heavy, the cracks too wide. Let us imagine 3 outcomes. In the first, Britain endures by retreating from Europe and fortifying its empire. It becomes less a continental power and more a global one, projecting influence through ships, colonies, and trade. In the second, Britain falters, unable to hold both empire and isolation. Rebellions flare, colonies drift, and the once mighty empire shrinks into something smaller, still proud but diminished. In the third, Britain finds a new partner across the Atlantic. America, rising in strength, joins Britain in an alliance of sea powers, counterbalancing the German order on the continent. In this path, the 20th century becomes a duel, not of Europe alone, but of oceans and alliances. For ordinary Britons, the reckoning is felt in quieter ways. In Manchester, textile mills struggle to find buyers, their goods undercut by German competition. In Glasgow, shipyards continue to hammer steel, but contracts grow fewer. In London, shopkeepers stock imported goods from farther afield, their prices fluctuating with the uncertainty of markets. Families sit at tables in narrow row houses, reading newspapers filled with stories of German parades and Ottoman triumphs, their pride wounded but their endurance unbroken. The fog over the Thames grows heavier, muffling sound, wrapping the city in uncertainty. Yet fog also conceals possibility. Within its folds, Britain may find new paths, unseen by others, forged by resilience and imagination. The creak of ships at dock fades into the creak of wooden piers farther west, where the Atlantic stretches toward New York. Across the ocean, America's skyline rises, its skyscrapers catching the light of dawn. The reckoning in London becomes a question in New York. Will America step forward into this altered world, or will she hold back, content to watch from afar? The Atlantic rolls endlessly westward, waves swelling beneath the glow of dawn. The creak of wooden piers gives way to the deep blast of steamship horns as New York awakens. The skyline rises above the harbor, steel towers catching the first rays of sunlight, their shadows stretching long across the water. Ferries churn through the river currents, gulls wheel and cry overhead, and on the streets below, the clamor of carts, automobiles, and newsboys fills the air. In this imagined world, America stands at the threshold of choice. Across the ocean, the Central Powers bask in victory, their banners unfurled from the North Sea to the Persian Gulf. Britain clings to her empire, France broods in defeat, Russia lies humiliated, the Ottomans revived, and here, across the sea, the United States must decide what role it will play in a world no longer balanced as before. Picture President Woodrow Wilson seated in the Oval Office, the morning light filtering through tall windows onto stacks of reports. His advisors speak in measured tones, their voices carrying both urgency and caution. Some insist that America must step forward, not as rescuer of the Entente that chance has passed, but as a power in its own right. They argue that German dominance, if unchallenged, will shape the century, pushing America to the margins. Others counsel restraint. Let Europe bear the weight of its own ambitions, they say. Let America prosper behind its ocean walls, untouched by the turmoil of a continent consumed by war. Wilson listens, his hands clasped, his thoughts troubled. He is a man of ideals, yet ideals falter when confronted with the enormity of reality. The American people themselves are divided. In New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, where ties to Britain and France run deep, many mourn the Entente's collapse and fear German hegemony. In the Midwest, where German-American communities flourish, sympathies tilt differently, with some expressing quiet pride in the Kaiser's triumph. Across the South and West, many citizens ask why Europe's quarrels should concern them at all. On farms in Iowa, in mines in Pennsylvania, in factories in Chicago, the war feels distant, its cost measured more in newsprint than blood. For most Americans, the question is not whether Germany has triumphed, but whether it matters. Economically, however, it does matter. In our world, American banks lent heavily to the Allies, tying prosperity to their success. In this alternate path, those loans may never be repaid, their losses absorbed reluctantly by financiers. Yet German emissaries flush with victory may offer new opportunities, trade agreements, markets for goods, investments in the sprawling new Mitteleuropa. Wall Street men in crisp suits weigh risk against profit, their calculations pragmatic rather than moral. The United States, land of commerce, may find itself drawn into German networks not by force of arms, but by the lure of contracts and markets. Culturally, the reckoning is quieter but no less profound. Writers in New England pen essays about America's destiny, asking whether a republic can remain aloof while monarchies dictate the fate of nations. Poets wonder whether the torch of democracy, if not carried abroad, will dim at home. In universities, debates rage. Some students champion isolation, invoking Washington's farewell address, while others argue that America's ideals mean little if confined within its borders. The Statue of Liberty still stands, torch raised, but its symbolism feels uncertain. Does it shine for the world, or only for those who reach its harbor? Imagine three possible futures. In the first, America retreats, choosing isolation. The nation prospers internally, its cities growing, its industries expanding, its culture flourishing in independence. Yet abroad, German influence spreads unchecked, and America's voice carries little weight in shaping the world order. In the second, America intervenes belatedly, sending troops across the ocean even after the Entente's collapse. Their arrival, heroic but too late, ends in bloody sacrifice, remembered as valor without victory. The nation turns inward afterward, scarred by futility, reluctant ever again to entangle itself in Europe's quarrels. In the third, America seeks a new path, not as ally of the Entente, but as negotiator with the victors. Wilson might propose his principles not as demands of triumph, but as foundations for compromise, offering America's recognition in exchange for a seat at the table. In this version, the United States becomes not a savior but a broker, shaping peace through diplomacy rather than war. For ordinary Americans, the weight of these choices filters into daily life. In New York tenements, immigrants read newspapers in many languages, their loyalties divided but their hopes unified by the promise of stability. In Midwestern towns, farmers calculate crop prices, wondering whether German or British markets will pay more. In southern states, families gather on porches, listening to the crackle of radio broadcasts, their world both distant and strangely near. Life continues, but always against the background hum of possibility. Wilson's own ideals may falter in this alternate timeline. In our history, he proclaimed the 14 points, envisioning a world made safe for democracy and a League of Nations to arbitrate disputes. In this world, With the Central Powers victorious, such visions may never emerge. The idea of a league might wither before birth, replaced by the cold calculations of empire and trade. Or perhaps Wilson, stubborn in his idealism, still advances his principles, not as triumphant declarations, but as fragile offerings to victors who scarcely need them. The irony is sharp. A vision meant to guide peace may in this world sound like a plea. And yet America's potential remains vast. Its industries roar, its population grows, its oceans shield it from invasion. Even in a world dominated by Berlin, Vienna, and Constantinople, the United States looms as the future's question mark. Will it rise to challenge, align, or retreat? Each path reshapes not only America's destiny, but the fate of the century. As the day ends in New York, the lights of skyscrapers glow like constellations, reflecting in the waters of the Hudson. Ferries glide across the river, their lanterns bobbing gently. On the docks, sailors smoke in silence, their faces turned eastward toward the dark horizon where Europe lies. The city hums with life, but beneath its energy lingers uncertainty, the weight of choices not yet made. The hum of New York fades into softer notes, the strains of a violin, drifting from a parlor window, carried on the night breeze. The music floats upward, across oceans and borders, until it mingles with the sound of violins in Vienna and cellos in Berlin, resonating in opera houses and concert halls. For culture, unlike armies or economies, crosses frontiers freely, shaping hearts and minds beyond borders. The violin's note becomes the overture for another transformation. The cultural landscape of a victorious Central Europe. The violin note lingers in the air, trembling like a thread of light stretched across silence. It floats from a parlor window in New York and drifts eastward, carried by memory and imagination, until it resonates in the opera houses of Berlin, the concert halls of Vienna, the salons of Budapest, and the cafes of Constantinople. Culture knows no borders. It seeps through walls and treaties, across mountains and seas. In this imagined world, where the Central Powers have triumphed, culture itself reflects both the intoxication of victory and the unease beneath its surface. Picture Berlin's theaters on a winter evening. Gas lamps cast warm light over streets bustling with carriages and electric trams. Crowds in overcoats hurry through the cold to attend performances that celebrate triumph. Patriotic plays depict German heroes storming trenches, operas swell with martial choruses, and painters capture parades in bold strokes. The city basks in pride, its cultural life a mirror of its military success. Yet within the cafes of the Kurfürstendamm, where writers and artists gather, conversations are more conflicted. Some embrace nationalism, crafting works that glorify empire. Others, wary of triumph's intoxication, turn to irony and abstraction, questioning whether conquest truly equates to progress. Vienna offers a different tone. The waltz still drifts through its grand ballrooms, couples spinning under chandeliers, but the music carries new energy. No longer the elegiac lament of a dying empire, it becomes a celebration of revival. Klimt's successors paint not only decay, but also grandeur reborn. Writers in smoky cafes debate federal reform with optimism, imagining a future where art binds diverse peoples together. Yet the shadow of fragility lingers. Some artists depict masked balls, crowded but anxious, symbols of harmony maintained by performance rather than conviction. Vienna's culture becomes a reflection of its empire, glittering on the surface, uncertain at its core. In Constantinople, the mood is transformative. Minarets rise over a city that glows with renewed pride. Poets write verses of Ottoman revival, blending tradition with modernity, their words carried by newspapers from Damascus to Baghdad. Musicians combine Turkish melodies with European harmonies, creating compositions that symbolize a new synthesis. German architects design train stations and factories, while Ottoman calligraphers adorn mosques with intricate patterns. The city's bazaars, alive with commerce, also hum with cultural exchange, as German engineers share coffee with local poets, as Ottoman students read Goethe alongside Rumi. A cultural renaissance emerges, not as imitation of Europe, but as a partnership, though always marked by tension between influence and independence. And in Paris, though defeated, culture does not die. The French spirit, wounded but not extinguished, expresses itself in art that reflects loss and resilience. Poets write of shadows and silence, of pride bruised but not erased. Painters turn to surreal images, their canvases filled with fractured forms that hint at rebellion simmering beneath humiliation. In exile, French intellectuals carry their ideas abroad, planting seeds of critique that may one day bloom into resistance. Even in defeat, France's cultural furnace smolders, feeding the possibility of future renewal. Culture, like politics, offers multiple futures. In the first, triumph breeds conformity. German victory cements a cultural order dominated by nationalism, with art and literature harnessed to glorify empire. Patriotic anthems fill schools, statues of generals adorn plazas, and dissenting voices are silenced or exiled. In the second, victory sparks experimentation. Secure in power, artists feel free to explore abstraction, irony, and modernism, producing works that transcend borders. The avant-garde flourishes, challenging authority even within triumph. In the third, culture becomes a battleground, torn between celebration and critique, between those who embrace victory and those who question its meaning. For ordinary people, these cultural shifts shape daily life in small but profound ways. In Berlin, children recite poems about German heroes, their schoolbooks filled with images of triumph. In Vienna, young couples attend operas that celebrate harmony, their ears filled with music even as their hearts sense uncertainty. In Constantinople, merchants decorate shops with both Ottoman motifs and German advertisements, their daily transactions infused with symbols of alliance. Culture is not only elite, but popular. The songs sung in taverns, the posters plastered on walls, the fashions worn in streets. Each reflects the mood of an era remade by victory. Globally, the impact resonates. German literature, music, and philosophy spread more widely, carried by the prestige of victory. Universities from Buenos Aires to Tokyo translate German works, eager to align with the cultural leader of the age. American intellectuals, once enthralled by Paris, turn their gaze to Berlin, debating Kant and Goethe anew. The balance of cultural influence shifts, tilting the 20th century towards Central Europe. Yet cultural dominance is never total. French, British, and American voices still sing, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in protest, weaving a chorus richer for its discord. Consider the cafes of Budapest, where Hungarian writers wrestle with their dual role, citizens of a victorious empire yet members of a nation still yearning for recognition. Their works blend pride with critique, celebrating survival while lamenting subordination. Or the artists of Belgrade, painting under occupation, their canvases filled with allegories of captivity and hope. Or the poets of Damascus, writing verses that honor Ottoman revival while whispering of Arab dreams. Culture carries ambiguity more easily than politics, and in ambiguity lies endurance. Cultural landscapes also shape memory. In our world, the Great War inspired poetry of sorrow, art of disillusionment, novels of futility. In this alternate path, the cultural memory of the war is different. Instead of futility, it becomes triumph for some, tragedy for others. German monuments rise, inscribed with names of victories rather than losses. French writers, in defeat, craft narratives of betrayal and endurance. Ottoman poets remember not decline, but revival. The war becomes not a wound shared by all, but a story fractured, told differently in each capital. As night falls across Europe and the Middle East, the violin note lingers still, now joined by trumpets, cellos, and drums. The continent hums with music and debate, with canvases painted and books published. Yet the harmony is uneasy, each note layered with tension. Culture thrives, but it also questions, reminding victors and vanquished alike that triumph on the battlefield does not silence the human spirit. The violin's note fades into whispers, voices in salons, in taverns, in quiet homes. Whispers of doubt, of ambition, of fear. For even in victory, shadows lengthen. The future, though gilded by prosperity and culture, may hold storms. These whispers become the murmur of uncertainty, the foreshadowing of shadows that no triumph can entirely dispel. The whispers spread like a draught in a darkened room, soft at first, then gathering force. They pass from salons to taverns, from quiet kitchens to university halls, from the lips of generals to the pens of poets. Whispers of doubt, ambition, and fear weave together, and in their weaving they become shadows. Shadows cast not by the failures of the past, but by the very triumphs that seemed so secure. For even in victory, perhaps especially in victory, the seeds of unease take root. Picture Berlin in the glow of prosperity. Children wave flags, shop windows gleam, trains thunder with goods from conquered lands. Yet in the corridors of power, debates grow sharper. Hindenburg and Ludendorff press for a permanent military state, insisting that the sacrifices of war demand eternal vigilance. Social Democrats counter with calls for reform, demanding that victory should bring not repression but democracy. The Reichstag trembles with conflict, the cheers of triumph outside masking divisions within. Shadows lengthen over the parliament's dome, hinting that unity forged in battle may fracture in peace. In Vienna, too, shadows creep beneath the glitter. Emperor Karl dreams of a federation to bind together Czechs, Hungarians, Croats, and others in harmony. But conservative aristocrats resist, clinging to old privileges. Nationalist leaders grumble, whispering that reforms are too little, too late. The empire glitters with victory parades and economic revival, yet beneath it lies fragility, as if harmony were a crystal vase balanced on a narrow shelf. One tremor, economic, political, or cultural, may shatter it. The Danube flows calmly, but beneath its surface currents twist. The Ottoman Empire basks in its revival, Constantinople's skyline glowing with pride. Yet even here, shadows gather. Arabs, promised autonomy, see little change. Armenians, Kurds, and other minorities live under the weight of suspicion. German advisors flood into ministries and barracks, their presence both a boon and a burden. The bazaars hum with trade, but in coffee houses young men speak of freedom, their words cloaked in allegory. Triumph delays rebellion, but does not erase it. France, defeated, sits in darkness. Its culture endures, its pride unbroken, but humiliation gnaws at the national soul. In Paris, writers craft bitter verses, their pens sharper than swords. In Lyon and Marseille, workers mutter about betrayal, some looking to revolution as an answer to dishonor. France waits, licking its wounds, shadows of vengeance stretching across its future. History suggests that no humiliation lies dormant forever. Britain, though isolated, casts a long shadow of its own. The Royal Navy still sails, the empire still vast, but the fog over London mirrors the uncertainty within. Colonies stir with unrest, dominions question their ties, and financial houses watch German markets with unease. Shadows creep across Westminster, whispering that the empire may endure, but perhaps not in the form it once imagined. And America, distant yet powerful, gazes at the shadows with hesitation. In Washington, Wilson debates ideals against pragmatism. On Wall Street, bankers weigh risk against reward. Across the plains and cities, the people wonder whether Europe's triumphs and failures should concern them at all. Yet the very act of questioning is a shadow, uncertainty about whether the nation should remain aloof or step forward. The ocean no longer feels like a wall, but like a bridge, its waves carrying both opportunity and danger. Shadows are not only political, they are cultural, psychological, human. In Berlin's cafes, artists sketch not parades but grotesques, mocking the arrogance of power. In Vienna's operas, Composers weave discordant notes into triumphant scores, as if to hint that harmony is fragile. In Constantinople, poets slip verses of doubt into lines of praise. In Paris, surrealist images emerge, fractured and haunting. Culture itself reflects the unease, shadows inked onto canvases, carved into symphonies, whispered in verse. Let us imagine three futures born of these shadows. In the first, they remain only whispers, never coalescing into storms. The Central Powers consolidate, reform where needed, and endure, their dominance stretching across decades. In the second, shadows thicken into crises. Economic downturns, nationalist uprisings, political deadlocks, each small at first, combine into collapse. Victory, once perfect, proves unsustainable. In the third, shadows transform into rivalries within the victors themselves. Germany, Austria, and the Ottomans, bound in triumph, begin to strain against one another. Partnerships fray, alliances fracture, and the continent that once bound to Berlin finds itself divided again, this time from within. For ordinary people, the shadows manifest in daily life. In a Berlin schoolroom, a teacher closes the door before telling students to think for themselves, hinting at truths not in their textbooks. In a Viennese village, peasants whisper that officials in the capital reap the benefits while they remain poor. In a Damascus coffee house, a storyteller spins tales of ancient heroes, his audience hearing not entertainment, but coded encouragement. Shadows slip into homes, into prayers, into lullabies sung to children. The nature of shadows is that they lengthen at dusk. And in this alternate history, though the sun of victory still shines, dusk already approaches. Triumph brings glory, but it also brings weight. The larger the empire, the heavier its burdens. The broader the order, the more fragile its foundations. What looks perfect now may crumble tomorrow, not because of enemies without, but because of contradictions within. As evening settles, the whispers soften, blending into silence. The streets grow quiet, lanterns flicker, and shadows stretch across walls. The future is uncertain, and uncertainty itself becomes a presence, as real as any army or treaty. The whispers fade into the sweep of time, into the turning of years, into the century that will unfold under the weight of what has been gained and what remains unresolved. The silence deepens, then breaks with a new sound, the ticking of clocks in libraries, the turning of pages in books. For the story of this triumph does not end with the war or with peace treaties. It stretches across decades, shaping not only Europe but the entire 20th century. The shadows give way to broader reflections, to visions of what a century rewritten might become. The ticking of clocks echoes in hushed libraries, steady and patient, while pages turn beneath the fingers of readers who seek to understand their age. Each page carries words shaped by victory. Each clock marks time in a world reordered by triumph. In this imagined history, where the Central Powers emerged flawless from the Great War, the 20th century itself takes a different shape. It is not the century we know, marked by 2 world wars, the rise of America and the collapse of empires, but another one, where the balance of power tilts toward Berlin, Vienna, and Constantinople. A century rewritten begins to unfold. Picture the 1920s under this altered order. In our world, these years carried both the exuberance of the Jazz Age and the bitterness of economic instability. In this vision, the mood is different. Berlin shines as the cultural and political center of Europe, its boulevards bustling with trade, its universities filled with foreign students eager to study under the prestige of victory. German modernism flourishes, spreading across art, architecture, and science, infused not with despair but with confidence. Vienna, too, thrives, its salons filled with debate, its orchestras commanding respect across continents. Constantinople stands reborn, no longer a relic but a capital bridging east and west, its skyline crowned with minarets and smokestacks alike. Colonialism takes a new turn. In our history, Britain and France divided Ottoman lands into mandates, reshaping the Middle East under their flags. Here, those lands remain under Ottoman control, strengthened by German investment. The Middle East becomes not a field of Western domination, but a region of Ottoman-German collaboration. Oil wealth flows earlier into Central Europe, powering industries and binding economies. The political map of the region shifts, but so too does its cultural map. Arab cities, still under Ottoman banners, balance loyalty with longing for independence. India, under British rule, feels the tremor of this century rewritten. The idea of British invincibility falters. Nationalist movements gain confidence sooner, sensing that Britain, isolated and humbled in Europe, cannot forever suppress their aspirations. Gandhi's voice, already rising, may resonate more powerfully, while younger leaders speak of independence not as a distant dream, but as an imminent possibility. Across Africa, too, whispers of independence grow louder. Without Britain's full dominance, the continent's future may be shaped not by one empire's mandate, but by the rivalry of several powers, Germany included. And what of America, rising across the ocean? In our reality, it became the arsenal of democracy, the decisive power in two wars, the architect of a liberal order. In this alternate path, its role is less clear. Without the call to arms in 1917, without the victory of 1945, America's ascent may be slower, more hesitant. Perhaps it remains wealthy, innovative, powerful, but less central to global politics. Perhaps the 20th century is not the American century, but the German century, its language, culture, and power radiating from Berlin rather than Washington. Yet history rarely silences potential. America's size, resources, and energy may still propel it upward, challenging German hegemony not in 1918 or 1945, but in decades yet to come. The Soviet Union, too, may never rise in this altered world. Without Bolshevik triumph, in 1917, Russia remains under the Romanovs, or perhaps some other fragile compromise. Revolution may stir, but it may be anarchist, nationalist, or fragmented, rather than Marxist-Leninist. The Cold War, as we know it, never materializes. Instead, the ideological contest of the century may be between German authoritarian power and Anglo-American liberalism, or perhaps between old empires and emerging nations. Technology and science follow altered currents as well. In our world, German science thrived, even in defeat, producing discoveries that shaped physics, chemistry, and medicine. Imagine what might emerge from a Germany not humiliated but exalted, its universities fully funded, its researchers celebrated rather than exiled. The age of flight, the age of radio, the dawn of atomic science, all might unfold under German leadership, their innovations spreading across Central Europe and into the Ottoman world. Yet technology, once unleashed, serves no single master. Airplanes fly across borders, radios transmit beyond frontiers, and discoveries ripple outward. Even in triumph, no empire holds a monopoly on genius. Culturally, the century bears new imprints. Literature in France, shaped by defeat, grows darker, more surreal, exploring humiliation and revenge. British writers wrestle with the loss of certainty, their novels tinged with fog and doubt. German literature, triumphant, risks either self-congratulation or ironic subversion. Austrian artists continue to blend beauty with unease, reflecting their empire's fragile harmony. Ottoman poets celebrate revival, but hint at unrest beneath the surface. A century rewritten does not erase tension, it reframes it, layering triumph with fragility. Let us imagine three broad arcs. In the first, the German century endures. Berlin leads an integrated Mitteleuropa. Austria Hungary sustains itself through reform, the Ottomans stabilize, and Britain and America adjust to a world dominated from the continent. Stability holds, prosperity grows, and history flows along a calmer path. In the second, triumph breeds hubris. Germany overreaches, Austria collapses under internal strain, and the Ottomans fracture despite victory. Rebellion, economic crisis, and new wars emerge, perhaps less global but no less devastating. In the third, the century becomes multipolar. Germany dominates Europe, Britain the seas, America the Western Hemisphere, Japan the Pacific. Instead of a world war, the 20th century is marked by endless rivalries, proxy struggles, and shifting alliances, a cold contest without a single defining conflict. For ordinary people, this rewritten century shapes lives in subtle ways. A farmer in Ukraine sends grain to Berlin rather than Moscow. A shopkeeper in Cairo sells goods stamped with German labels. A student in New York reads Goethe as eagerly as Shakespeare. A worker in Vienna hears factory whistles not of despair, but of steady prosperity. Yet beneath these rhythms, the same questions endure. What does it mean to belong, to resist, to dream in a world shaped by others? History never eliminates uncertainty. It only changes its form. As the clocks tick and the pages turn, the sweep of this rewritten century becomes clear. It is not the century of our memories, but one of alternate possibility. Triumph has shifted its axis, yet the fragility of human ambition remains. For even when everything seems perfect, perfection itself may carry the seeds of unraveling. The turning of a page grows louder, until it closes with a soft thud. The sound echoes like finality, yet it is not an ending. It is the threshold of reflection, the pause before we circle back to where the story began, the trenches, the Somme, the night of decision. For to understand the century rewritten, we must return to that first divergence, and ask again the question with which all began. The thud of the closing book lingers in the silence, a sound both heavy and gentle, like the final note of a symphony. It echoes across the library walls, then fades into the distance, dissolving into memory. As the echo fades, so too does the imagined century, its alternate paths lingering like smoke in the air. And yet, to understand what we have traced, we must circle back to where it began. The mud and wire of the Somme, the gunfire and cries of men who lived through that night when possibility split into paths unseen. Picture the battlefield again, a landscape scarred by craters, torn by barbed wire, choked with smoke. The sky is dim with the haze of shellfire, the ground trembling under the weight of artillery. In our reality, the Battle of the Somme ended not in breakthrough, but in stalemate, its name remembered for slaughter rather than triumph. But here, in this alternate vision, it is the moment of divergence, when the German counterattack smashes through, when French and British lines collapse, when victory tilts irreversibly toward the Central Powers. From that instant, every consequence we have followed unspools like threads from a single knot. We return to that night not to rewrite history with certainty, but to reflect on how fragile its balance truly was. A single decision, a single maneuver, a single breath of chance, these can shape the destiny of nations, the lives of millions, the very course of centuries. History is never inevitable. It is always poised between paths. The Somme reminds us that what we inherit as fact was once only possibility. The triumph of the Central Powers, as we have imagined, brought victory parades in Berlin, renewed life to Vienna, revival to Constantinople, uncertainty to London, humiliation to Paris, hesitation to Washington. It reshaped economies, redirected trade, altered culture, and recast the century itself. Yet every triumph carried shadows, nationalist unrest, political divisions, colonial stirrings, cultural unease. Even in victory, fragility lingered. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of history, that no outcome, however grand, is immune to the vulnerabilities of human ambition. Imagine the men in the trenches, French, British, German alike. To them, victory or defeat was not an abstraction but survival. A bullet avoided, a shell misfired, a comrade lost or spared. They could not see the future their actions shaped, could not know that historians and dreamers a century later would trace alternate worlds from their footsteps. Their suffering was real, their choices immediate, their courage undeniable. Whether in triumph or defeat, they carried the burden of history without knowing its direction. And so, as we close this imagined journey, we are left with questions rather than conclusions. Would a victorious Germany have created lasting stability or merely delayed conflict? Would an enduring Ottoman Empire have reconciled its peoples or fractured under its own diversity? Would Austria Hungary have transformed into a federation or shattered despite triumph? Would Britain and America have ceded dominance or risen again to challenge a German century? Each possibility remains suspended, like branches of a tree reaching into fog, never touched, never certain. The value of such imagining is not to predict, but to reflect. By tracing these alternate paths, we see more clearly the precariousness of the world we inherited. We recognize that history is not a chain of inevitabilities, but a web of fragile chances. The victories and defeats that shaped the 20th century might so easily have been otherwise, and in that recognition lies both humility and wonder. The Somme, the mud, the smoke, the cries, they fade once more into silence. The parades in Berlin, the debates in Vienna, the markets of Constantinople, the fog of London, the whispers of Paris, the towers of New York, all dissolve into mist. What remains is the awareness of possibility, the knowledge that the world we inhabit is only one among countless paths. Close your eyes, and hear again the silence after the guns. The battlefield grows quiet, the smoke drifts away, the stars emerge faintly above broken ground. In that silence lies the weight of history, and the lightness of imagination. What if everything had gone perfectly for the Central Powers? We have walked that path, layer upon layer, spiral upon spiral, and returned at last to where we began. The answer is not certainty but reflection, not finality but wonder. The final image fades. A soldier standing in the twilight of the Somme, his face indistinct, his figure blending into shadow. Behind him stretches the road not taken, before him the path that became our world. He does not choose, he simply walks forward, and history follows. The twilight deepens, the image dissolves, and we are left with a question that lingers, like the last toll of a distant bell. How many other worlds lie just beyond the choices not made?